The old juggle one. All right, good morning, everyone. We'll call the 2019 Strategic Planning Meeting to order. City Clerk, if you'd call the roll, please.
Mayor Owen.
Here.
Vice Mayor Colodi.
Here.
Commissioner McGurk.
Here.
Commissioner Hartman.
Here.
Commissioner Sacks.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the members of the public that are here. Really appreciate you taking the time to come out and participating in this process. And as you'll hear, kind of leading off, we've had a lot of public participation in this process over the last couple of weeks with a couple of public meetings, and we'll get that input. So kind of agenda for the day, we're going to lead off with hearing some of that input, and then later in the meeting, somewhere in the 2:45 range, we'll have another chance for public input. But again, we consider that we've had two different public meetings for a chance to kind of inform this process. And so we're going to hear, first of all, the results of that, and then we'll kind of go through the discussions we have today. And then at the back end, we'll have some more chance for, if you've heard something today that piques your interest and want to comment on, you'll have a chance to do that at around 2:45. We all have a agenda and slide deck in front of us. Gentlemen, one thing I wanted to just pose right up front for the commission's decision, and even Kyle, I'd defer to you as well, but we have Carrie here with us, who is more than willing to be here with us, but I'm wondering if it is the highest and best use of her time for this day. If I recall last year, I don't know that we really threw a lot of legal questions her way that we needed an immediate answer to. So I felt like we could let her go back to her office, and if we need her, we can call her in, and she can even be listening to the side. So anybody opposed with having Carrie go back to her normally scheduled life?
No, I think that's a good idea. What we can do is we can just schedule like an hour in the afternoon for her to come back, and if we don't need her, we can just say.
It's actually a good idea. Yeah. So we'll have a time slot. We'll talk through about having Carrie come back at a particular time. So if we have questions, we can queue them up for that time, and if nothing's come up, we'll let you know. So.
I would say looking at the agenda, probably just to check in right after lunch, or 1:30 or so.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Carrie. All right, with that, we'll turn it over to the folks at Community Solutions Group.
Good to see you all again. Thanks so much for having us here. Glad you're here. Pete Seckler, Laura Smith. We saw you about 2 weeks ago, if I recall. What we want to do today is primarily have a conversation about your vision, your goals and objectives for the future of New Smyrna Beach, and how that can relate to some kind of strategic initiatives or strategic approaches to things that you can deploy over time and develop actions for. After you kind of set sort of a philosophical, you kind of clarify maybe a philosophical direction around some key topical subjects. The way that we've kind of organized the day, just as a way to have a structure, is to say that there's probably three major functions that we need to touch on today. There's what I'm going to call scan, which is something where we'd like to just take some time and share some information with you. And what that really is going to be kind of a roll-up of what we think we heard in our two public meetings, what we heard from you in the individual meetings that we had, some things that we heard in our stakeholder interview with staff, and just kind of share that so that everybody kind of has the same information to start with. And then we want to kind of use that as a way to sort of boil into what we think some key topics are. And that, I think, would be an opportunity for us to maybe kind of dive into, do we have the right key topics? Are there other things that are really top of mind for you that we need to sort of get on that key topics list and start to talk about how we want to approach strategically what those key things are. Then we'll take a break for lunch, and then we'll come back and we'll dive a little deeper and start to talk about, okay, if we're settled on the key topics and we have kind of a basic philosophical approach to those key topics, what do we want to do to start to move the ball? And then from there we'll get some public comment to kind of add to this discussion, and then we'll get to wrap up in closing steps. Okay, make sense? And this is meant to be very informal, particularly once I get past the first couple of slides. If you want to stop me, anything like that. As you can see, I've only got about 20 slides, and I think about 16 of them have to do with public input, and then a couple on your input, and then we're going to go to conversation. So first of all, just to sort of clarify, oh, and incidentally, there's about 3 slides in here that are out of order in your deck. So maybe look at the screen. But I'll tell you what we've done so far is, as you know, a week ago Tuesday we had one-on-one interviews with the commission. We met with department directors as a stakeholder group, and we had a questionnaire for you. We talked specifically about sort of strategic initiatives on your mind. We talked about goals for 2020. We talked about how to sort of think about progress. What does progress look like? And what kind of needs or areas of input that you want to sort of get to from the public. Then on January 9th and 12th, we held these 2 open houses, and we had a total of about 60. December, yeah, what am I looking at? Oh, I'm on January here. I'm sorry. See, that's just, there you go.
They're out of order.
December 3rd, December 9th, this is all weird out. Yes, 5th and 9th in December. Last Thursday, this past Monday. We had 2 open house sessions. I apologize for that typo. We had these open house sessions, and we talked about kind of 4 ways of sort of asking people questions and getting input about New Smyrna Beach. One was about how people think about quality of life. One was sort of the services that are most important to residents to ensure that quality of life. And we actually got into sort of an exercise of like, if you had money, if you had $10 to spend in $1 increments, you know, where would you prioritize the things that you really want to invest in? We talked about key places in New Smyrna Beach, and then there was a question about communication and just sort of understanding how people stay in touch and stay in tune, and how well is that working in New Smyrna Beach, and what can be done to make the communication channels more open and inclusive and transparent and all those things. So we asked folks, what's most important to you, how would you invest, and how would you define success? So I'm going to take these kind of in reverse order. Let me start with communication. I think that it's very, very important that the city continues to work on effective means of communication with folks. Today, at least among the people that attended, I'm not going to say that this is a statistically valid survey of all of your residents, but of the 60-odd people that attended, most of them, you know, the largest amount of them said that they found out about the meeting through the website, some through the local papers, the email blasts, and there were some Facebooks, then there was, you know, some scattered other things. So I think these are the main communication platforms now, and I think that what people really want is they want the website and the emails, and they want access to the public meeting minutes because they can't always attend council. They want those things to continue to be the primary forms of communication, but I think there's a real desire for them to be more effective. And we can talk about what that looks like. There's also some conversation about just other sort of community newsletter types of things, other ways to sort of penetrate into the neighborhoods and into parts of town that we don't always get to. The key things that people want to know is they want to understand what's happening with development, what's happening with proposed projects. No surprise. I mean, the character and quality of new development, how that's going to affect the character and quality of the existing community, you know, is, you know, paramount on people's minds. So they want to be up to date on that stuff. They want to be able to monitor what's happening with the city commission and what's happening in City Hall through the meeting minutes and the dates of meetings. And then there's a significant, probably second issue, which really has to do with you know, what's going on with the environment and what's our plan for the environment. And then I think on this sort of cultural, social side, you know, just having access to your events calendar. I think what we're primarily going to talk about today really is about, you know, how people get information about development, proposed development, and what are we doing to protect and enhance the physical environment. Another exercise that we did had to do with what we call a story map, where we had a GIS map open in the meeting, and people could go in and make comments about specific places. I'm not going to go into all of the comments now. I'm just showing the one slide. We'll have the roll-up comments for you when we do our wrap-up report. what I would say is that most of the comments, first of all, a lot of the people that were attending were really beachside residents. Was an important thing to know. We had a few downtown residents, but it was primarily beachside residents. Most of the comments had to do with downtown and beachside, but there were also comments going out 44 and obviously dealing with the western expansion properties west of 95. So I think this is an important thing to understand as sort of the cohort of who was in the room. There's a lot of folks kind of from the traditional downtown and from the beachside. Now, to the discussion of kind of how would you invest? And I think Commissioner McGurk is actually finally on the, yeah. Now you can be on the right slide. From here on out, you're on the right slide. Once you get to this.
Thanks, Pete.
Those first, well done. Yeah. So the first. Well, I'm watching you try to figure out where I am. Those first 2 or 3 slides, they were all boogered up, and I'm sorry about that.
I assume you used me because we've been doing this so long over the years.
Well, I just saw you flip to it. It was like, oh yeah, there. Okay, yes, he's on the right. Finally, yes, we figured it out. I'm sorry. Those first 2 or 3 were transposed. So I think this is an important thing to talk about. So in terms of where people wanted to sort of prioritize investment or prioritize change and enhancement, a lot of it had to do with infrastructure, which I think is really about roads and utility service and water quality. A lot of it had to do with environment. So again, a very, very strong concern about what's happening with the environment. And I think it's a sea level and coastal resiliency issue on the beach side and on the downtown side. And as you move from downtown and start to move west, it's really about wetlands and water quality and stormwater management. Not to say that we're not also concerned about those things on the beach side, but I think if you were to sort of bias, I think we've got kind of two topics with environment, and it's really about what would happen in a big storm and how is the city prepared for climate change, and then it's what are we doing to ensure the long-term viability of environmental systems out to the west. I think there's a lot of interest in just sort of neighborhoods and neighborhood quality of life living here, and I think that's equivalent for the downtown and for the western development along 44. And then there was actually, there was some discussion about parks and safety, or parks, public safety, maintenance, but those were I think not as pronounced as these 3 large areas. And to kind of go through these in just a little bit of detail. I think that what people were most interested in within infrastructure was really about just investing in roads, parking, and basic water sewer things. If you look at this, but it's really about transportation and parking, to be honest. In environment, it's really about protecting the natural environment and preserving wetlands and concerns about sort of the viability of natural systems long term if we don't manage growth. In terms of neighborhoods, I think it's about neighborhood integrity and a set of kind of fine-grained things with your existing neighborhoods, and I think it's about growth management out to the west. And I think there's also some things that have to do with the character and quality of the businesses that you have here in town, and we'll talk about that today. In terms of maintenance, it's mostly about water access and park access, the character and quality of sort of the things that people use every day. I think that probably as if we were to bring the public works director up here and we were to have a conversation between him and your city manager, I'm sure that there's things underground, utility systems that also need to be dealt with. I'm not sure the public always thinks of those things, but so I think we have to kind of put this a little bit into context. I think people are most familiar with the things that they see and they experience, and certainly people see and experience the parks and the water access, and I think that's in part why we got the answer we got. How would you invest in terms of parks? It's really, I think, people are talking about we need more parks in more areas. And I think particularly as there's just access to green space. I think there's an emotional sense that access to green space is getting more difficult, and that as new development is built, it will either take away green space or we won't have adequate parks and recreation facilities to serve new development as it occurs. Public safety, I think a lot of this actually really boils down to traffic and code enforcement types of things. That we just have physical environments that people are trying to navigate that don't feel safe. And are we monitoring what's going on in some of our neighborhoods from a code enforcement point of view? And then from a quality of life kind of discussion, it's hard to put your finger on what is quality of life, but we ask people to kind of think about that a little bit. And I think this is going to be a good thing to discuss today, is what is quality of life and how do we kind of drill down into how to kind of capture it and preserve it. It is about, I think, some physical things and some non-physical things. The physical things, I think, really have to do with access to the physical environment. I mean, the reason that New Smyrna Beach is here is because of the access to natural lands, the proximity to water, and access to the beach. And I think to the extent that people are experiencing, either literal or perceived limitations in their ability to access those things, I think that's of concern for people. So I think the physical environment and feeling like you can still access, the original reason why everybody is here is very, very important. I think there's clearly areas where people feel like that's being compromised. I think another couple of physical things, the idea that things are of a sort of a small town scale and small town character, and that businesses are local, and that people know each other, and those types of things. And so I think there's sort of a transition from things that feel small town in their appearance to things that feel small town and familiar in terms of how people interact. And I think there's a concern, are we trying to become a big city where people don't know each other and we're not related to the local businesses, we're not related to our neighbor, and so I think that what people love about New Smyrna Beach is the fact that there is community connectivity, both physically as well as interpersonally, and that there are local, unique, human-scale businesses and human-scale places here. And I just think there's a concern that those characteristics are getting, either pulled apart or they're getting pressure and tension on them. There's a couple of other pieces of input that we got in the last couple of days, and I think most of you received, or I think all of you received a memorandum from the Residents Coalition with some key priorities, and they had some really, really good backup bullets behind each of these 4 priorities. And I think that they actually touch on the important subjects, but also these 4 things I think touch on, where some of the tensions are, where it might seem like there's competing interests. So first of all, preserving the historic areas of New Smyrna Beach, protecting and expanding the city's small, one-of-a-kind businesses, and then leveraging current city assets to support robust economic development. So robust economic development is an interesting set of words, because I think having positive economic development in your city is absolutely critical to your future. But if you put that up against this idea of small town character and one-of-a-kind unique businesses and so forth, we have to think about, if we're going to have more economic development happening and we're going to have more economic activity occurring in New Smyrna Beach, we have that. What that boils down to is more people, and actually thinking about more jobs, and who's going to support that retail. So we're going to have economic development, but we want to preserve the small town character. That's the crux of the tension. And I think all 4 of these points are correct. I think they can be managed in a way over time that is mutually reinforcing. But there are naturally some built-in, tensions and conflicts where it can seem that one thing is fighting against the other. And I think that's the crux of the community discussion. So we need to figure out a way of defining the future growth that is consistent with the small town image, or I would say sort of the small town feeling of New Smyrna Beach, even as some necessary new things do occur over time in terms of economic development. Does that make sense? There's another document that has some good kind of vision statement, mission statement types of things. And I think what's interesting about this is, without getting too much into the details, it has to do with the character and the quality of the community conversation about the issues on the previous slide. It has to do with things like integrity, accountability, communication, teamwork, and those types of things. So I think that the ongoing challenge in a high character place like New Smyrna that has multiple, I don't want to say pressures, but multiple areas of activity happening across town is what's the character and quality of the conversation. And that's where I think that the leadership of the community and the membership of the community, which is actually the same thing, the residents, the business community, and the elected officials and staff, I think that's where the challenge always lies, is to continue to put yourselves together in a position to have high caliber conversations that are factual and constructive and can move people in a direction. I will tell you that in our public meeting there were some really interesting dialogues that happened at the table, and I think they kind of reflect some of this issue about communication. A person would say, I very much believe in this, and we should absolutely do this, and this is my worldview, it's about this. And a person right next to her would say, well, that's completely contrary to how I experience New Smyrna Beach, and how I want to use XYZ facility, and how I want to be connected. And they realize that their two worldviews probably both have validity. They're in direct opposition to each other. And so the challenge as leaders and as a community is to figure out how to reconcile, those things in a way that is mutually reinforcing and respects balance between some of the solutions that we need to get to. So it's not helpful to say, well, this is my way and it's the only way. It's more about, where can we find common ground, and how do we preserve the things that are most important in terms of character as the city continues to grow and evolve and change. How can we grow and evolve and change while maintaining who and what we are? Now, this would be a good slide for you to look at on your handout because it's a little difficult to read. I want to transition that community input into some of the things, some of the bullet point things that we all talked about, and then I'm going to open this up for some discussion. Actually, let me just turn the page. I'm finding new glasses too. I finally transitioned to bifocals, and I feel like I'm in a fishbowl here. It's like depending on where I am. So what you see on here, we took the names off the commissioners just so that we could sort of talk about what are some topics that everybody referenced, and where are the elements where we've really got 3, 4, and even 5 commissioners all brought something up. It doesn't mean that the issues that maybe only have 1 or 2 bullets aren't important, but we can clearly see some areas where you already have significant common ground. And it's really about parking and transportation and traffic. I think that's of concern to everybody. I think sea level rise and open space preservation, and you could probably put wetland management in there as a detail to that. So there's a set of things there with environment that I think are very, very important to all of you. I think growth management is very, very important to all of you. And I think public awareness and a public awareness campaign and being connected to the community through dialogue is very important to all of you. And so I think what that means, if you go back to some of these other things, I think you're talking about many of the same things that the community's talking about. Folks are maybe using a little bit different words, but I think when you boil it all away, it seems like some big picture topics really are growth management, the environment, and when I say the environment, I mean everything from climate change to birds and bunnies and water quality. How do we define quality of life, and are there some things about the quality of life at New Smyrna that we can capture and maybe track track and maybe even measure our ability to deliver on. This condition of having three distinct character types within the city. We have a beach form in terms of urban form. We have a beach community. We have a historic traditional town, and then we have Western expansion, Western suburban development. And so those are three distinct sort of place types. And there's a lot of discussion about what those place types are about, and how do we manage character and quality within those three very different place types. And then finally, about communication and trust, and how do we again sort of foster, build, and maintain a constructive and productive ongoing conversation. Touching on some things that we heard from staff, and I'm almost done. I want to open this up, is maybe some more kind of fine-grained things, but I think they're important to consider, is the idea of, how do we balance quality with quantity? Are we doing things in the right way, or are we just trying to do more? And where are the places where we need more capacity, whether it's services or economic growth or whatever it is, versus balancing the right kind of service or the right kind of growth, so that we're really a quality based. We're maintaining a quality sense to what we're delivering. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail today. I think financial sustainability is very important to the staff. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to pass budgets, and with all due respect to everybody that gets 10 $1 bills, and it's easy to talk about all the things you want, but at some point you got to figure out how to pay for them, and that's where things get difficult. Is how do you prioritize things through your budget, and how do your priorities and your values get reflected through your budget? And there is a sense that there are pockets of the community services aspect of the local government here that have limited resources, and we need more capacity in terms of resources, whether that's staff or that's activities or whatever it is. And then finally, I think there's a lot of concern on the part of staff about just really getting some more concrete definition around what the physical outcome could or should be on the State Road 44 corridor as you go west. Really, I know staff has been working on that, but I think really getting a more clear definition of how we're going to manage that growth through design and through entitlements. How are we going to do that? And then a handful of kind of specific locational items. The administrative office building site, access to the river. There is an enclave here just to the west of us that's actually in the county, and so there's just some discussion about duplication of services and control, not control, inclusion, not inclusion. I think there's enormous excitement about the Turnbull Creek initiative and what that can mean, and how can we utilize that in conjunction with some other facilities like Holland Park and so forth. So I think that's viewed as a really significant step in a good direction, and how can we leverage that and expand on that. Some discussion about the A1A corridor, and some discussion about the future of the birdfish, and not just the hospital itself, but just the whole kind of complex, as that thing is slowly getting repurposed and repositioned. So let me actually just stop there, and I thought we could maybe, I'd like to just get some reaction to that, to go around the table, take some notes, but I think that's a lot of buildup and a lot of detail, but I wanted you to hear, at least some kind of a summation of what we think we've heard from the community and what we've heard through the other conversations. And it seems like, if you can kind of abstract some things, so I don't want to have a list of 25 things. I want to get to a list of 6 or 7 things. It seems like, just as initial big picture topics, you can put some things underneath these as major headings. These are the things that seem to be of real importance to essentially everyone that we spoke to, from the public to the staff to yourselves. So let me stop there, and let's get some reaction. Just go around. And are there things that we missed? Are there nuances to things that are important to you that maybe are not included, or that I didn't touch on in some way? Anyone want to start?
I'll give it a go.
Sure.
So I think in the big picture, it's very important for us to, as a commission, finding a few things that we can agree on and move forward on. We need to see progress in certain areas, and we're doing a lot of talking and planning, and we get sideways a lot of times. Issue of homeless. We want to take care, we want to feed the homeless. Now we have a homeless problem in the city that is getting to be a significant burden. Growth management, budgeting. So quality over quantity. What that means to me is our economy has been dependent on day trippers for 40 plus years. That is no longer that should no longer be our driving economic engine in this community, because as Central Florida explodes in growth, everybody wants to be here. So we're here, we love it here. But you know what? So does a lot of other people. So we're going to have to deal with day trippers coming in, and I think we have in a few different ways. We've raised the beach fees. We've started charging for boat ramp parking. Now you get into the issue of revenues. We all want stuff. All the residents want things, but we don't. But the elephant in the room is, how do we pay for it? So when I look on this sheet, one-on-one commission interviews, and I agree with all the priorities. What tickles me a little bit is US 1 CRA development is a C. So our city has a lot of, think of it as a business, has a lot of different products. US 1 is an arterial commercial road, which is one of the primary sources of income to the city, or should be. Right. It's an underperforming product. The focus on US...
Underperforming asset.
Yeah, well, if you look at a business model, we have a business with different products that we generate revenue on.
Right.
So you can look at US 1 as an arterial commercial road that should be generating significantly more revenue than what is occurring from it. And we don't have to really change anything. We're not changing zoning. We're not reinventing the wheel in the community to try to create something that isn't already here. It's low-hanging fruit to redevelop and focus on this arterial road so those property values increase and we get a windfall of revenue from those increased property values. So I'll stop there. I don't want to take up too much time, but we need to focus on things that we can agree on, because I've been doing this for a few years, and everybody, the input's good, everybody has good ideas, but it's the details that we get caught in. So I want to find a way today where we can focus on agreeing on certain things that we can move forward on, and they're going to be painful, and we don't have easy answers. So, thank you.
I have some thoughts about that, but I don't want to get in the middle. I want to keep going because I think we're going to have a bunch of things to talk about. You're giving me the look. Not yet? Or you ready?
Oh, it's fine. As you go through the list of categories on how would you invest, the bottom line is setting a standards for it, and I think that goes back to our land development regulations, because that would address the parks, it would address the infrastructure, pretty much touches on everything. So I know that this year we're going to be putting a lot of effort into that, and I think that would tend to solve a lot of...
When you say that, just so I understand what you're using the same jargon, are you talking about standards in sort of a design standard sort of a way, or are you talking about it sort of in a level of service sort of a way?
Well, it's a level of service in that we're kind of tied into the number of units per acre for new construction. That's allowed to be built. But when you get into that, we got to look at those standards. Like we've protected wetlands last year. We should work on that a little bit more. One concept I would like to see is you take the wetlands out, you have a developable portion of land. And I would like to see a regulation put in where a certain percentage of that developable land be either left in its natural state, turned into community parks, so on and so forth. It may involve making some cluster zoning so that we don't infringe upon any property owner's rights for how they expect to develop it, but we could end up with more parks, less infrastructure we have to maintain, and developing a true neighborhood feel out there. So that's where I'm going on that. And kind of tied into that, I've had this feeling since I was on the Economic Development Board 5-6 years ago, is we're kind of developing two cities here. We have west of 95 in coastal woods, that type of development, where they are not really involved, and you can check on who contributed in this account in our studies.
Right.
They, I do not believe, truly feel the need to be involved in our city,
Right.
and we should try to work towards that. Their commercial activities, they want to go buy something, they go to Port Orange because it's literally closer and easier to get to. Maybe we should develop a small community center out there for police, fire, some type of meetings, which we don't have now. Haven't had a meeting out there since I've been here, both on the desk up here and at the podium. As they continue to grow, they are going to carry a much larger political weight in what goes on, and I think we have to be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, off the top of my head.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a few words. I think we, as a commission, agree on so much, and ironically, with the people as well. We came here for the same, we come here for the same reason, to live and to visit. If we lose those features, we'll survive, but we'll morph into an exurban or urban area. I would say urban because of the density. And I can speak to Commissioner Colodi, preservation of space equates to dollars. Should that be one priority? I think let's start with how can we be a sustainable, let's call it two city like Mike did. I think we're all one city. It's just a different character out there in my mind because there was such a gap in the way we build things and we allowed for this, I think, a tremendous density out west with no regard for any thoughts about the environment. It totally changed the environment to an urban or suburban environment. Right. We have to deal with that. We have to deal with the old infrastructure we have on beachside. And it's changing. Beachside is a sand barrier. It's going to blow whichever way the ocean blows. We have to be prepared for that. We have to maintain water quality. We know our quality of potable water has gone downhill a bit. Our recreational waters are sometimes toxic, but as it is in all of Florida. So let's get smart and stop talking and start spending the important dollars on how do we, let's sustain ourselves instead of just grow. Be careful and really press the development that's coming because I know, I hear from experts that we've already exceeded our capacities. You can hear anything from any other expert. Florida has exceeded their capacities for human population. So we're already going to reverse osmosis on water. That to me is a diminished water quality. We have a UC, thankfully, for that. But when I looked at our last budget and saw that we didn't differ on much, but except for a cost of $140,000, I realized for the rate above rollback. And it's like we all care about keeping the quality city. Can we be a nice suburban city that really shows that it protects its natural land somehow through codes, building use? Let's stay on that track. I think we're on the right direction. I hope we are.
So my question is, on the one-on-one commissioner interviews, the A, B, C, D, and E is not a ranking. It's just,
Yeah, it's just,
okay.
in fact, when we did it the first time, we numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I said, no, let's get those off because someone will think that's Commissioner District
Yeah.
5, or we just said, Are you trying to figure out which one is you?
No, absolutely, no.
It's just a way to
I'm-
generically
We just
identify.
wanted to generically.
Yeah.
I've already got
Okay,
guesses.
so there's
Yeah, I know.
no
I know you're in
measure,
there trying to sort of discern.
so there's no measure on that?
No.
A, B, C, D, and E?
No, yeah.
Commissioner McGurk
There's
referred to
no-
that.
They're all
It
equal.
could be red, green, blue, yellow. We could, square, circle, triangle.
So he referenced that, and I was
Yeah.
just making sure I wasn't misreading
Yeah,
that.
who's?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I appreciate that. I
We know
mean, it
who's-
looks
we
like
know
a
who's-
ranking.
We know who is number C.
I mean-
But I think it's not completely important to this conversation, because I think it's about
Uh-huh.
understanding where you as a body sort of align on some key issues. I think is what's really important, and I wanted to sort of get past, the individual personalities and foster, shared discussion.
Okay. So I agree with everybody else, is we have each side downtown, and then we have west side. And we really haven't been including west side as much as we probably could have or should have.
Right.
I think we've made some improvements with it through the neighborhood council, where we've included some of the people that live out there as a part of that body.
Right.
But when I had my first town hall meeting out there when I got elected, and there's no place to hold a meeting.
Right.
I mean, very limited.
Right.
Their HOAs have to go to Port Orange to find meeting space.
Right.
So I think as a city, we've kind of excluded them, not on purpose, but through design.
Right.
And my vision here is, this is like the third one of these I've been through. And we talk about a lot of issues. We talk about a lot of planning. What are our goals? Where do we want to be? But we're slow to move in those. So I would like to let's identify some short-term problems that we can work on and have a definite plan, and then look more for long-term planning and goals. At some point in time, we're going to have to provide police and fire west of 95. We need to. I'm letting you write. And I think you've done a good job in narrowing it down to 4 or 5 things. The problem is that we've kind of learned from mistakes over the years. So we've done improvements. And there's always somebody out there to say, well, you should have done this or you should have done that. Well, I agree with you, but give me some examples, or give me something that I can use, or some tools. Our greatest asset in this community are the residents, because we have an older population, so there's a lot of experience, there's a lot of retired people, a lot of professionals in the community that maybe we can pull from more often to say, okay, well, Commissioner Collodi, he has this background in engineering, so as a resident, he would be a great asset when we start talking about wetlands. Well, what experiences did he have, or what's a different view? Because we kind of get focused in that as a city, and then as a staff, we kind of have our ideas of where things go based on best practices or what other cities have done or whatever. But there is that opportunity to get more public involvement and to see, are we headed in the right direction? And I think we did that last year through the coastal resiliency. I mean, we had a tremendous outcome of residents and input, and those things are what we need to use going forward. But like I said, I mean, we should be developing short-term goals and then long-term goals, and how are we going to accommodate the future? Because we seem to be playing catch-up,
Well,
and
yeah.
when we get into the financial side of it, nobody wants to have their taxes raised, but everybody wants their infrastructure
Sure.
to be up to date.
Right.
We have the only 2 bridges going to the beach. We don't necessarily, the state has to maintain them, but we have to support that.
Right.
We have other barrier communities that
Right.
have bridges that are our responsibility, And these are big cost items, and we budget to try to take care of the immediate needs, but we're not looking.
By the time you take away the must-haves,
Yeah.
you know, there's only a certain amount left for the want-haves.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of shift towards a long-term plan, because when the recession hit, everything kind of stopped. I mean, we quit buying police vehicles. We quit replacing equipment that was worn out and not broken. We should have had a contingency set aside to, plan for downturns in the economy. What are we going to do? I mean, how are we going to support staff? Layoffs are one way, or attrition or whatever, but then when the economy turns around, everybody's looking for the same people we're looking for. So, we haven't kept good quality employees either through attrition or, that sort of thing. So I just think there's needs to be some better long-term planning.
Were you finished?
Yeah.
So, for me, a couple of things. No surprises here. I mean, when you think about this, and I told them in my one-on-one, which was briefly, this was kind of right before one of the meetings, I said, this is what I expect, and this is about the breakout I would expect to hear it in. And it was pretty darn close. So I feel like the soliciting the input is the easy part, and we've done that, and we've done it, and we've done it. And yet, to all of our points, it is the action that's the hard part. And I've heard a couple of examples even today that I think there's broad agreement that something should be done. But then when you really, to Commissioner McGurk's point, when you really try to get into the details and work that out, I think there's difficult conversations that we just frankly have not had yet. And so, for instance, we had, commissioners talk about, preserving open space, and that sounds great, and you can get a room full of people to applaud by saying that. Then you talk about not liking certain developments, which I've also said. And you can get a room full of people to applaud that we don't like certain developments. But when you marry those two concepts to what Commissioner Colodi is talking about, of how do we develop in the future, and what are those standards, and by nature, and we've talked about this a little bit on the dais, this older notion of smart growth said, cluster all of your infrastructure in a corner, cluster all of your housing in a corner, smaller lot sizes, higher density, and that preserves a lot of open space. And yet the feedback you hear from the community is, well, we don't like that. We want to look more like Faulkner Streets and more like these neighborhoods, and yet these neighborhoods didn't preserve a lot of open space. I mean, if you just look at an acre by acre of coastal woods versus beachside, there's a lot more open space. If you zoom out, it's just you don't see it. It's hard to see. So I will admit to, I've done all those things. I have gotten a room full of people to cheer about not liking coastal woods and preserving open space, but yet the difficult conversation is, what do we want to do moving forward? The next thing that comes before us, how do we need to be leading staff in what are the actual changes to our LDR? Do we want to go back to larger lot sizes? Is that the product we want to put on the field? And what does that mean for open space, et cetera? Or do we need to have an educational campaign about, hey, this is the part of the project you see, but the unseen part of the project is truly this preservation of a few hundred acres of open space. I don't have all those answers. I think those are some difficult conversations that we probably just haven't had yet. And sometimes when I would rather have them outside of a particular project. To me, this is the time to do that versus we have something that's coming at us, and then we're trying to just respond quickly to that kind of one-off. So a couple others kind of thoughts. I was really appreciative to see that director input column. I brought this up last year during this session as someone who's been staff more than I've been a director. There's many initiatives that can come from the boots on the ground that live and breathe in this city in a way that even we as electeds don't. There's things they can do that they see are wins that I hope we take the time to prioritize and embrace that make their lives, not just make their lives better, but make them, enable them to better serve our citizens. And so I think there's investments that we might can make in that column and making sure we're listening to that feedback and their input, because many times I'm not a professionally trained engineer. I'm not a professionally trained, IT person. So there's expertise on staff that we've hired the best and brightest. I want to make sure that we're engaging that. And then lastly, and we've heard it a lot today, and I'll try not to harp on it all day, I promise. But as I looked at my notes from last year's meeting about this, I'm really proud of a lot of the progress. I mean, you can look at a lot of things and say, hey, we checked some boxes. We made some progress. Especially, we had a lot of leadership transition as well. So doing it in a time of leadership transition, I think, is something to be proud of. That being said, there's obviously some things we didn't quite get to, some things that I'm frustrated with myself more than anybody that we didn't push certain items forward. But one of the main things I think is we heard a lot, and I tried to make some notes as we went through, but there were comments made about, there's this feeling about public safety. There's this perception that there's less open space. There's this thought that there's this. We believe there's this. And I've said many times, I would like to see us moving towards metric-driven so that we can definitively answer those questions. So a great example is, there's a petty crime happens somewhere in town. Well, immediately there will be some post on social media, and then there will be this slew of comments underneath that say, crime is worse than ever. That's not the data that I've seen, but we're doing a poor job, I feel like, of aggregating, collating, and presenting that data out that actually has facts behind it that says, actually, our crime statistics are lower, and compared to national trends in comparison cities, we do quite well. We're not getting that information out there. In many cases, I think we are tracking it. I think it is available. It's just that we're doing a poor job of kind of aggregating it, measuring it, and then benchmarking off of that and reporting off of that. So I agree we need to address all of these things, and we'll have some deeper conversations. But my main focus, I made it clear from the get-go on this, but my main focus on this would be if we came out with some kind of a scorecard where we're able to measure these things. How do we measure success? How do we measure if we've made the right changes on growth management? If we don't have metrics where we're saying, this is what's important to us, and so we can measure year over year a trend in this area. Tree canopy. Every time a new construction starts, there's this sentiment in the community that we're losing our tree canopy. What is underreported is the corresponding offsetting trees and the net impact to the tree canopy within New Smyrna Beach. Now, do any of us love taking down a historic tree? No. But I guess, again, this message of overall, we do have measures in place to protect our tree canopy, and we're doing a decent job of that. Park space, how are we tracking that over time? What's our park, some pro rata per capita measurement on park space? So I think that would underpin everything else we're trying to accomplish, because it would give us a yardstick. It would give us a measuring point on each of these issues where we can start quantifying them. And I think it would actually help us drive, talking about budget and the dollars, I think it would help us drive budget decisions. We invested heavily last year in public safety, and I'm obviously okay with that. But it's hard to say no to some requests. I mean, if somebody comes in and says they want to spend more on public safety, that's hard to say no to. But I don't know if it's exactly where we need to spend. Like, I don't know if every year we need to add more to public safety. Let's look at the data. Let's look at the measures to say, no, actually, we're doing well in that, but we're underperforming in this area, so we should invest a little more in this area. That's how most businesses operate, and I just feel like we could probably do better in that area. So that's kind of my initial thoughts, and my hope today is we can actually take a few key areas. And Commissioner Hartman talked about, short and long-term type things. I agree. I think there's probably a whole different session that we could just talk about some low-hanging fruit. Like, hey, here's some quick wins. We could do this by January, by March, by April. And then there's these broad strategic things. So my hope today is that we can take a few and actually talk about it, actually have that conversation about, if we could redesign, X subdivision, what would that look like? What do we truly want to give staff some guidance on these difficult issues? Homelessness, what are we going to actually do? What are some actionable steps we can say that we're going to take to address those? So it's kind of my first thoughts.
Eric, I want to comment. Measurables, yes. As we all know, we fight a lot of rumor and innuendo. We fight social media. One person posts something, and 200 people agree to it. And when I'm looking through these demographics, and a lot of times I'll say to people, so what do you think our growth rate has been? And they'll be up in the double digits, 10, 15%. When you look at our average growth rate of 1.6% from 2000 to 2017, people are shocked. But what our trends show when we're doing measurables, Mayor, just like you're describing, we have grown at a relatively low pace, and we have become a wealthier community.
Yes.
Those two things are incredibly important and indicate some good decisions that have been made. And, how we build, how we grow, smart growth initiatives that we adopted in the 2000s and have now, with the economic boom increase, we're now seeing those developments. It's what the mayor alluded to when you look at coastal woods, where you have hundreds of acres of open space, but the density is clustered. And this was the smart growth initiatives that the cities and the counties came up with. And we need to, and what I'm really saying is communicate. The mayor's right. We're not doing a good job getting the information out there, communicating, because I think that we're in a lot better shape than what the general public believes, and a lot of that is simply set up on social media. So, and I can probably narrow down the issues to the day trippers that come in, and I keep going back to that because there's a feeling that there's been this tremendous growth in the community. What we have is a tremendous increase in people trying to get into the community on a daily basis, which diminishes our quality of life and the level of service that we can provide with our current infrastructure.
So just for the benefit of the folks that are here that don't have the couple of pages you're looking at, these were the pages that I had in the wrong spot. Laura, you want to talk to this for a second? We did just very quickly, just sort of out of our own sort of interest, very, very quickly we looked at just a couple of basic demographic things to understand kind of where the community is, where the community was, what, sort of trend line. So we looked at population and household median income.
So what we were going to do was actually look at the, I don't know how familiar you are with ESRI and how they function, but they do current year estimates of, your 2019 estimate of your population. The problem is because we're literally about to have a census, this is the most inaccurate year you could ever look at an estimate of anything like that because it's based on so many prior years of estimates, and it's your standard of error is very rough. So instead of looking at 2019 figures and using that, we decided to stick with the actual American Community Survey data, which would be most recently in 2017 because its accuracy level is far greater. So what we tried to do was give you a perception or an understanding of how your community has been growing in terms of population base. So from 2010 to 2017, when we look at your annual growth, so every year you're adding about 1.6% in terms of population. So that's your average annual growth rate. That's not the total for that 7 years, it's every year that's what you're growing, which is a pretty steady number. Being under 2% is pretty good. When you start looking at some of the suburbs around major metros, you'll see those numbers far higher because, like you were talking about, the recession kind of slowing down growth and that pent-up demand that then exploded on the other side of the recession. So you're seeing population growth in some of these suburban areas around major metros at far higher numbers than this. Also, what we wanted to do was look at your population broken down by age cohorts. And this is important when you're talking about service provision and the types of services that you're providing, what your community looks like, and how those services need to be provided to your community. So what you see when you're looking at your age cohorts over the last 7 years from 2010 through 2017 is your median age is obviously rising. You can see that from that graphic. But when you start looking at the stacked columns, basically you go from the youngest age cohort at the bottom of that stacked column to the largest age cohort, which is 65 plus, in the top of that stacked column. And that all totals to 100% of your population for each of those years. So where you're seeing that increase in your 65 plus population, you're also seeing some stability in your middle-aged population. So it's not necessarily that you're losing a certain portion of your population. It's simply that some of that growth that you're experiencing, that 1.6% a year, is more likely to be in that 65 plus grouping because you're not necessarily losing the other portion of your population. And then we did also look, the other one we have in here is the income levels, and as the commissioner was suggesting, your median household incomes since 2010 have been rising, and when you look at the actual household incomes in that same stacked column where you're looking at under $25,000 a year in that lowest column, and then you're looking at $25,000 to $50,000 a year in that next column, and the next being 50 to 100, and then 100,000 plus in that top section, you're seeing basically those two middle columns staying somewhat stagnant, while the 100 plus household income column is starting to get larger, moving closer towards current date, and that lower column with the 25,000 and under income level is getting smaller. So you kind of start to see that your middle class folks are staying pretty stable in terms of the percent of your households that are made up of that income level, whereas your higher income levels, that 100,000 plus, are growing, and you're starting to see some of the lower income levels shrink. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have less people in that category, less actual residents in that $25,000 a year and less category. It simply means that the growth you're experiencing may be attributed to the higher income levels, which is why that percentage is growing.
So, we just wanted to pull those just to look at it just for our own sort of curiosity, but also maybe provide a little bit of a benchmark of, how, just in a snapshot, how fast is the community growing, what cohorts are growing. I think it is, the trend lines say, slow, steady growth, a slightly aging population, which is actually probably in line with national averages in terms of just the baby boomer generation, people living longer, and all of those things. And also, but I think the other thing you see that is pretty significant is that there is a growth in per capita wealth that's occurring. So it's just a point of reference.
It brought up one thing I meant to mention, going back to the long-term portion, is something I would love to see us be more progressive on is looking truly long-term and trying as best we can. And I acknowledge, we're not going to get this perfect, but acknowledging certain long-term possibilities and eventualities. So, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but if you follow the technology curve, technology radically changed, computing, personal computing. Then it moved to kind of communication, radically changed communication. Technology right now is radically changing the transportation space. And I don't think cities are acknowledging that yet, but it's happening. It is radically changing. And it will, if you rewind to 2005, the impact of the cell phone, even at that time, and we were all carrying around Motorola Razors then, but it was still radically underestimated how much of an impact. We didn't anticipate having this kind of technology sitting in front of us and this kind of a device at that time, and yet, 10 years later, it was there. That same thing is happening in the transportation space. So, as we talk about infrastructures, we talk about all those things, I'd love to see us, if we spend money on experts, that's an area I think it'd be nice to, try to be progressive in that space, and look ahead. Another one that I read a fascinating article that a citizen sent the other day about affordable housing, and they said, that there's a crisis now, a bit of a crisis now, and it's really related to the baby boom population is kind of creating this crisis. But what will happen in, they say, about 20 years, maybe even less, is there's going to be a glut of affordable housing. Housing inventory will be widely available because different demographics, different demands for housing. In fact, they say there'll be a lot of housing that just won't be in demand because the type of housing stock that is being built to serve that population doesn't appeal to, let's face it, from my generation down. It's just kind of a different style, different vibe. So, as we think truly long term, I don't know how you bake all those things in, but I think it's an area that if we wanted to be a model city, acknowledging some of those things and trying to think through those things as we talk about infrastructure, as we talk about some of these challenges, would be great. But I also acknowledge we've got issues today, and we have residents today, and you can't put all those on hold to, just because you say, well, it'll work itself out in 20 years. That's not a great political stance, I guess.
I just want to add something. We're kind of a small city still, and we're in the face of like a technological and population boom and awakeness. So how do this city survived 250 years, right? But it's done a few things. It's morphed, like from a fishing community to a railroad community to a tourism community. So I think maybe it's how do we adapt to the pressures of how we grew out west, how we need to sustain the historic and kind of exposed beach side, because I think it's threatened. That's part of our, that SWAT. That's one of our threats and weaknesses. I hope, and I'm not that privy to what the UC thinks about, but adding the proper stormwater retention and cleaning of that water is going to be one of our priorities. It's not glamorous or pretty, right?
It costs a lot.
And it costs everything is costing.
No fun, and it costs a lot.
I mean, we do kind of quarrel at budget time, right? About where I mean, now we got a budget. To be honest, we're the board members of the CRA, so we have to think about our corridor US 1, how we would like that to look and grow, and be economically viable. US 1, I think. Can you tell me a place on US 1 in Florida that's nice, decent, palatable, where you can go and enjoy yourself and do great commerce?
There's just a few.
Let's put you on the spot.
I'm thinking of, there's a pretty decent stretch through Boca.
Are they urban? Because I don't know if the city wants to be urban, but we're eventually anyway.
I think to the point that was made earlier, I think what's important for coastal communities to understand, there's a big history of coastal communities in Florida as essentially being residential housing developments. And as they move forward in time and they want to provide services, whether it's police and fire, stormwater management, parks and recreation, whatever it is, the only way to fund those services is through taxing the residents. And in other words, the only place that the tax base will come from to provide those services is through residential tax base. And so the communities that have a commercial tax base, which tends to use those services at actually a lesser amount than the residents, a business doesn't use a park. A business doesn't have as, police fire calls in the same ways that, say, a neighborhood does. Those are external dollars to support infrastructure and quality of life things that the residents can enjoy. And the coastal communities that don't have a good cross-section of complementary commercial uses, not only do they miss out on having a grocery store or whatever those uses are, they miss out on having alternative tax base. And those places are really strapped. I won't name any by name, but you can picture that in your mind.
It's harder to find the local. We all talk local, but we want to shop local. I don't mind spending a little more because we do for shop local. But the big box store,
Right.
But
Yeah.
people, I hear people say they don't mind going to Port Orange if they live out west. I know that they planned on a commercial town center for out there. Never really happened. We can't get it to happen. But then again, I worry about the green curtain west of there. Sorry, I know it's somebody else's zone. I worry about my own zone. Because when I moved there, they said, "Oh, you're built out." No, we're not. And we're challenging that beautiful river out there. It's already damaged. So we got so many things to worry about. Plus, we got to manage. I know our department heads are here, so thankful they do their jobs pretty well, or else we wouldn't be running at all. And then we got to make the big decisions.
We're often put in a place of vote. Some project is some potential business partner, because I think we all understand what he just covered. That we just did a physical impact study, and that supports that as well. The commercial is we need commercial development. There's a particular type and style that we want. I would love to see us get away from kind of low end retail. That's not really helping. It's a stepping stone. It's great. It's where we all started. But we're often put in a place where we have projects coming that we may not like, or we may not like certain elements of. I would love to see us forming a vision for 44, and I think this was touched on somewhere, but forming a vision for staff that wanted it. Forming a vision for 44 of here's some things that we would celebrate. Here's some things that we would be win-win-wins, and that wouldn't be met with resistance, and giving some of those putting that word out there to the community, to the business leaders, to our staff, to our economic partners, to say here is what we want to see along there. And if the answer is just nothing, then we've failed, because that's not feasible. That's just not doable. There's vested rights to those property owners. I know that some residents may want that, but then they can go buy all that property to preserve it, either via, like we did with Turnbull, or individually. But I think that's something that I would love to see us kind of casting a vision for, is what would we support along 44? And that's harder to do. It's easier to say no to what's proposed than it is to say, well, here's what I'd like to see instead. And that doesn't mean we'll get it necessarily, but I don't believe we're steering in a certain direction. I think we're just kind of corrective steering when something comes at us, versus saying this is where we're headed. And I think the comment Commissioner Sachs made, that really resonated with me, about kind of the evolution and how we've changed. And we probably are at kind of a what is our next evolution? What is this next? We've moved from fishing village along the way. So what is the next iteration of that? Is it just Orlando's beach, which I think no one wants, but that's what I think we were for a while. So what is that next evolution of New Smyrna? So it's interesting.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, to comment on that, if you saw the article in today's paper, Orlando's going to move to Daytona. 10,000 of them will move to Daytona, and then will be Daytona's beach, because they've privatized all their beaches. So, that's maybe end up being our future that we certainly aren't looking forward to. But I think part of this, we've talked a lot about infrastructure. We talk about water quality and stuff like this. What I would like to see when you come back is maybe you need to have a conversation with the UC and say, what are your strategic goals for the future? Where are you headed? I think with the positive things that we've seen out of them in the last year, 2 years, you know, they're now thinking about that, and they're having a more productive conversation about where they want to be and what their issues are. And I think that needs to be a part of ours also, because without them, you know, they are the utilities.
Right. So really linking the future land use idea, there's been a lot of discussion about how to link future land use,
Right.
which is land development. How to link future land use with community character. There hasn't probably been a lot of discussion about how to link future land use with infrastructure delivery.
Yeah, and even
So
with
it's really those three things.
water quality issues. You know,
That's
we
what-
have water quality, and you know, Commissioner Sachs referred to that, but they're the ones who's going to be in charge of that.
Right.
So what are their what's their strategic plan
Right.
going forward to provide that?
Right. And how can you get policies in place that are mutually supporting each
Yes.
other? Yeah. So, I want to keep this conversation today at the right altitude, which I think is at the strategic altitude as opposed to the tactical altitude, which is, you know. But I think there's a couple of places where it helps to maybe talk about tactics a little bit, because it maybe helps inform, you know, the fact that there are strategic opportunities. You can be strategic. So, for instance, you know, when you think about West Side character, there's a number of interesting things that you know, were said, and you know, particularly, you know, I think the mayor was talking about sort of, you know, this idea of cluster development, and you don't see what you've saved because it's in your line of sight. And so the question for me becomes, you know, having maybe a little bit more nuanced conversation about the horizontal footprint of development versus the vertical footprint of development. I think the community is obviously concerned about the vertical footprint. What I mean is what you see. You know, when something goes up and it's 6, 7, 8 stories tall, and it's in the foreground, I mean, you see that, and there's a vertical impact. It's a lot more difficult to get up in the helicopter and say, okay, if we did, you know, 2-acre ranchettes, you know, and consumed all the land and didn't do any conservation strategy or wildlife corridor strategy or environmental drainage strategy, you know, what you'd be doing is driving around and you're looking at a lot of stuff that seems sort of low density, but you don't realize that you've actually impacted a physical acreage that's, you know, potentially 2x, 3x, 4x as big. And when you get down to environmental systems, it is about usable acreage. It's about areas of impervious surface for water quality and all of those things. So when you know, when sort of the environmental community and when the planning community come together and have these conversations about, you know, clustered development, what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, okay, if you've got 10 acres of land and you can do, you know, say 4 units to the acre against that 10 acres, then you get to do 40 units. But if 3 of those acres are wetland, and we really want to have some protection around that wetland and maybe connectivity to the next wetland, what you can say is, you know, rather than building, you know, the single-family detached house with the St. Augustine lawn and all of that stuff, you know, we'd rather have you save the 3-acre wetland, create the 1-acre buffer, and create the other 1-acre connection, and we'll have you do your 40 units to the acre on the remaining 5 acres. So 40 against 5, instead of doing, you know, whatever that math is, instead of doing 4 units to the acre, now you're doing 20 units to the acre, but you're doing it on a much smaller horizontal footprint, and you're keeping open space intact and potentially positioning to where it could be usable by the community.
That's
So that's
exactly how we're
kind of the
developing.
thesis. That's the thesis of what that discussion is. And the question is, you know, what's the right amount? How do you do it? You know, is it done well? Is it not done well? But that's the theory. And it is. And from a wildlife and wetland integrity point of view, it is a valid theory.
Yeah, and unfortunately for us, I think the conversation, you know, we're presented with it as kind of an either or. Like you could either do this or you could take the 40 and spread it out. from a community perspective, I think what they would rather is both. So, have have the open space, but then in the area that's built, let it be this, kind of the more spread out. And unfortunately, what that does is that takes that 40, that 40 total and reduces that to 20. I say unfortunately to the person that's doing the economics, not unfortunately to the community, but unfortunately to the person that's, invested in this. And that's the rub, and that's where we.
And this is where I do want to be careful. I don't want to take this too much farther because we will get into a conversation about details and tactics and very fine-grained things that we're not in a position to discuss or debate today. But what I would say is that as a general trend, I want to connect affordable housing to environment to the residential marketplace, which is something that you also mentioned earlier. I mean, there is a general trend, and I actually want to change this. I don't want to use the word affordable housing. I'd like to use the term attainable housing, because I think affordable housing comes with a clear connotation of tax subsidies and federal subsidy programs and so forth, and that's an important thing too. But I think the meat and body of the issue nationwide really is about attainable housing for people that are making a middle income, family, and they can't get into housing. So what's the problem? The problem is that the cost of new construction has risen faster than the cost of incomes, and so what's happening, we work for a lot of different types of developers at all different price points, and I can tell you I've got folks that work, that I know that work, with very, sort of conventional, housing development providers, and they say, the hardest thing in the world to deliver out there is the $200,000 house, because you can't build it for that. And so the challenge is there's this very narrow place that allows, young families or young professionals or otherwise just people making, a good solid middle income, wage to get into new construction, because new construction is extremely expensive for a variety of reasons. And so where that's driving is that units are getting smaller, and the delivery of how things are packaged is not, the sprawling community, with the extra, 1,000 square feet that you don't need. The trends are moving away from some of that, and how that connects to environment is that it does allow for products to get packaged in ways that, from a mathematical calculation against net developable area as opposed to gross developable area, densities are a little higher, but things get clustered in a way that you can actually do these environmental and open space types of ideas. That is happening. Whether that's the right thing to do here or not, I think that's the discussion for what's the vision for 44 on the west side. What I will say to the sort of visual impact thing, though, another point that you made, is, to me, as I come into communities like New Smyrna Beach, and there's two things that definitely impact my perception of the community, and they really just have to do with where development is built, how close is it to the road, and whether or not there's a landscape buffer. It's like a serious tree canopy landscape buffer. So as I come into town, the areas that have a significant tree cover along the road, which is how I'm perceiving the community as I move around, and then I'm seeing generally lower scale development, it doesn't feel as impactful. When I come up to the coastal woods thing at the corner, it is 3 stories, but it's right there, And so where I think that maybe, if you were to undertake a real visioning exercise that would talk about what the outcomes could or should be on the west side, I think thinking about what your corridors want to look like, what your sight lines and sort of the character of what the community is as you move around it is important. I think thinking about overall scale and things that are above the tree line and things that are below the tree line is a very important point, because the tree line is generally about 50 feet. And if you're below the tree line, there's a way that you can fold into the environment visually in terms of that vertical impact. And then when you think about the horizontal impact, finding places to cluster development so that you can create not only environmental, you can preserve environmental function between wetlands and so forth, but actually create places where people can go out and experience the environment, which I think goes to something that was said earlier about, if you're in the west side, are you really part of the New Smyrna Beach experience? And if the New Smyrna Beach experience is about connection to nature, connection to water, connection, to a slower and calmer style of life, are there places on the west side where you can actually experience that? And the time to think about it is now, because after all the development happens, it's really hard to go in there 20 years later and retrofit that in. So that's where I think the move with the Trimble Creek thing is so substantial, because it hits on all those different kinds of points. Does that make sense? I don't know how much of that you all agree with or don't agree with, but I think that if you look at the west side, and if you want to think about how to grapple with it, and I'll get out of the altitude of tactics and just get back to strategy. I think those are the kinds of questions that you can ask yourself: is how do you want to guide or mold how things look? What's the view from the road? What's the connectivity between parcels? What's the connectivity between environmental systems? And then how do people get to use that stuff? Does that make sense?
It does to me,
Okay.
you know.
I'm getting these kind of
No
wry
one's
smiles.
disagreeing, I think.
Okay, I'm
No
not
one's-
sure what I'm getting here.
We're with you so far.
Okay, good, okay. We said we were gonna take a quick break. It's 10:30, we're actually right on time. You wanna take like a 10-minute break? And then we'll kind of take these subjects and pivot and kind of talk a little bit about what we think we should do. I think there's some really, really good thoughts that have been thrown out.
Later.
I don't know if
Bring the meeting back to order. Looks like next plan is to kind of power through from now until lunch, although we may need to build another small break in there, but we'll see. You know, one thing is to lead it off, one thing I stole from my old boss at Embry-Riddle when he came in. He came from the outside and he came to the university, and he picked up a saying, and he would say a lot. He said, "I'll take our problems." And basically, in the higher ed space, you know, there's a lot of universities that are struggling, a lot of universities that are closing, especially the liberal arts universities. You know, declining enrollments, et cetera. And Riddle, we had issues. We had parking problems, ironically, and other things, but we didn't have that. We didn't have some of the same financial struggles underpinning all of it. And so, you know, as I think about the things that we're talking about, and you look at this list of issues, I'll take our problems. I mean, I'd rather be worried about, you know, defining growth than with a town that's dying. I'd rather be worried about finding the right thing to come to town rather than having nothing that wanted to be here, you know, dead and abandoned downtown. So, you know, I think it's a real testament to staff. I think it does a fantastic job. You know, the fact that these are the issues that citizens are bringing to us, and it's not, you know, the fact that our parks are in terrible shape or, you know, these kind of things is a testament that, you know, we're doing a decent job. You know, the city's in a good place, and we can only get better from here. And we could get worse, but we're going to get better from here. But I'll take our problems, and so we're building from a position of strength, which is always a nice place to build from and start from. And so again, I think it's a real testament to obviously previous leadership, citizens, and staff for doing a good job to get us there. So
good. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the things that New Smyrna struggles with and debates and so forth are all, you know, challenges and issues of success. You know, and if nothing was happening, you'd have a whole other problem. And you know, cities are not, you know, you can't take a city and like a wooden ship and put it in a bottle and put a cork in it and have it always be the same. It's just not always. That's just not going to happen. You know, it is a growing, breathing thing all the time. And you know, just coming down Canal Street, I mean, I can remember 10 years ago when you know, the corner there at Canal and US 1 was the Badcock Furniture Store. And at one point, there obviously had been a reason to have a furniture store there. That point obviously came and went, and that building sat empty for a very long period of time. And today it's got different uses in it. There's different things happening. But the building is still there, the function is still there, and it's actually participating again, you know, in the downtown, which, you know, I think that's what cities are all about. I think the other thing I'd say, just as we get started, I know I misspoke on a couple of the names of some of the places that, you know, I get them all mixed. I can see them all very clearly in my mind, but I got all the names mixed up. So I think the project that I was talking about was with the 3-story stuff that's close to the road is the Beacon, and again on that one, I think things that are above and below the tree line, I think that's a significant demarcation. Is where's the tree line and how do you perceive it relative to the environmental ceiling? But also, how close is it to you, and what is the view shed? I think really forms how you perceive the physical environment. And so, I think one of the things that we talked about earlier is, you know, that I think is probably I want to just touch on a little bit more is, do we think that really trying to form a vision for State Road 44 is a strategic idea that we can expand what we're already doing? And I guess that's a question for the commission as well as for the staff. I mean, I know there's been a lot of work on the west side. There's been a lot of engagement of the development that's happening out there. Is there anything that we can do strategically coming out of today that could put us in a position to try to get ahead of that growth and help guide it and not just react to it? Any thoughts? I mean, is that,
Are you speaking in the area near Walmart and West?
well, yeah. I think there's kind of two, and there's probably a part A and a part B to when we say, the western,
Correct.
the western side of the city, in terms of the sort of the suburban expansion. I think there's sort of the near, what I would call the near State Road 44 corridor, the near corridor, which I would define that as, plus or minus the Walmart and the Winn-Dixie, right? And then I would say there's the 95 interchange region, which is a whole nother, set of things, because that includes a lot of greenfield property that is entering a period of transition, and we're starting to see that transition start to happen
Yeah, I think
in real time.
I think the zones we can all relate to is kind of from like that Mission or Wallace Road out to 95,
Yeah.
and then there's 95 West.
Yeah.
To me, that's the two kind of. That's how I usually kind of break that down.
Or where you're, kind of maybe even just the zone from US 1, say, to about where you're at.
Yeah.
And then there as you get out towards the interstate. and past
Yeah,
it.
yeah. There's between Wallace and 95. There's some green and brownfield is the distinction. Kind of west, it's all kind of brown. I mean, all kind of green space, greenfield. But between, there's some redevelopment that could be done. The old sugar mill gas station, Sugar Creek gas station type area, and then also some green space. So sorry, go back to your.
No, because the inner area you're speaking of from 95 East is pretty well set in what we've approved in the past for development. We've made some attempts in the buffering and items such as that. At 95 itself, it's going to be a very intense development, which is going to affect the traffic and everything else like that. But I don't think we've really given a lot of thought to standards from going west from there.
West from 95.
I know there's a few approved residential developments and mixed-use developments that have been approved in the past, but they haven't come to fruition. And now would be the time to look a little harder into what we want to see from the highway and when they're put in. Right. That's kind of a somewhat of a blank canvas at this point.
Right.
But I don't want to be in a position, well, I won't be in the position 20 years from now to look back and say we should have done something back in 2020.
Right.
You have any thoughts on that, though? Because my gripe is we talk in broad strokes. What is it that we have seen that we don't like? What can we start, I guess the popular phrase is drill down on?
Well, we
And
have.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. I can go on. Well, obviously we've got to preserve the environment. We all talk about open space, but there's really two characteristics to open space. One is open space to protect the environment, such as Turnbull Creek. And the other is open space that's usable by the neighborhoods and by the communities in general. And that's where I think we need to put some focus on, is what we have in these big PUDs that have been approved, and they're going to look for modifications because they did it 10 years ago, and that's where we get our foot in the door, because we can get improvements that we want because they're looking for something also. Along the highway, we just have to make sure we got our buffering in there. UC is going to be doing significant developments on their property. You got Williamson that eventually they're going to try to put down to 44, and you have the very intense development on the 95-44 corridor. So we really got to pay attention now and get ahead of the game for those things. I didn't get specific into it, but like on the big PUDs, maybe a little more clustering, which is very good.
And I agree with you 100%. And I can tell you that when I go out to Walmart, I don't like it. I don't think it looks particularly attractive, that whole development.
No.
And I think that I can point to that and say, I've been to other towns, I've gotten off at interstates, especially down south or up north. You get off around Hilton Head, or you go down Jupiter area, you see a lot better better designed
Right.
developments where you have quadrants of intersections and stuff.
Addressing that particular property, back when it was first approved, it was set up in such a way so you have a whole bunch of little lots fronting right on the highway itself.
Yeah,
And they're gonna
outparcels.
become one fast food after the other, or one, I shouldn't say car wash because we're getting one, but
Right.
that type of use, which is not representative of what we want the town to look like.
Right.
They're all services. Maybe all those little parcels should be screened from the highway itself and should have all their access from the inside.
Mhm.
If you go back 30, 40 years and you look at the development of Big Lots is in right now, there's still out parcels available in there that they could expand upon. So that's the type of longer range planning that I like to see. I like to get those basics set in ahead of time.
Right. So I think, I think what, besides the appearance and the character stuff and the forested buffer and all of those things, sort of visual things, I think what you're sort of getting at is if we look at all that growth out there, or all those land use rights, I should say, how do we engage those developments in a way that we can actually construct a true community infrastructure that has to do with environmental open space, environmental integrity, parks and recreation opportunities, including community centers and the other things that you need, police, fire.
I just about was right down, utility service.
Is there a way to sort of look at, when the whole thing gets built, will there be a connective community infrastructure that actually allows that area out there to be a place that's worthy of the new Smyrna Beach lifestyle, or will it simply be a series of real estate transactions with disconnected ideas?
And that's where I'm going with that long-range planning look. Commissioner Hartman pointed something out that I was trying to say a little bit better, is we need some type of community center out there. It's not a new concept. If you want to go out in California, you got Pasadena and you got West Pasadena. They're different communities, yet they're interconnected. They each can supply their own service, but they're one entity. And we have this big barrier called 95, which really makes it difficult to pull both sides together. I don't have the answers to this particular issue.
Well, and again, we're not going to go. There's only so
Correct.
much detail we can, tactics. We can only just talk about so many tactics today. But it seems like at a strategic level, this is something that I feel like we're hearing over and over again, is the desire to somehow get in front of the future, so that as development happens out there, not only does the character and appearance of it look, within the standards of New Smyrna Beach, but are we actually building community out there, or are we building, suburban sprawl that I think brings the kind of social disconnection that the suburbs have been so soundly indicted for over the last 30 years. And so I guess what I'm saying is, I think there's physical connections like environmental open space and environmental systems that need to be thought of cohesively. But I think part of being in New Smyrna Beach is the connectivity of people to place and the connectivity of people to each other. And to me, that's what community infrastructure is really all about. And so what are the things that we could get in front of out there to connect people to the place and actually have a place? So like the Turnbull Creek move is a fantastic move, because that's going to be that's a place. But how can we create places where people can actually come together and actually feel that they are part of community at a social and cultural level? Or is it a series of isolated things that are essentially disconnected, and you get into all those other kinds of discussions about what's happened to our towns and cities across the country? Does that make sense?
Jake had a comment.
I think it's important for us to concentrate on starting right now, how we can provide good traffic flow without, because when we provide better traffic flow, it just means more traffic.
Right.
So, and then we have to balance, we have so much that we're dancing on a knife's edge here. And we have to balance, are we right now, eco-tourist community with a lot of popularity for people who live here and a lot of popularity for visitors. I think we're beyond capacity on our older roads on Beachside and our smaller capacity out your way, Jason, out Venetian Bay and all that. Isn't that yours?
Right.
Yours. So how are we accommodate? We need to concentrate right now how we're going to accommodate the future.
Yeah.
And balance commerce and nature.
Right.
Because that is essentially what we need, whether the tourists come or not.
Right.
We don't have nature
Right.
tied to everything. So
Right. Right.
people are coming to the realization
Right.
we need a few trees and some wetland.
Well, okay, so then there's another question, sort of jumping to the quality of life thing and some things that were said earlier about quality versus quantity. You know, another one of the areas of tension is, you know, what's the price point for New Smyrna Beach? And philosophically, you know, all beach towns, you know, want to be inexpensive and easy to access economically, and particularly areas that have, you know, it's a high retirement area, it's a high second home area, et cetera, et cetera. But I think another way of sort of thinking about that is to say, you know, does New Smyrna Beach want to be positioned as the low-cost provider of everything? Or do we, if we aspire to something that performs better or looks better or serves our citizenry better, you know, are there things that we're willing to say this just isn't good enough? You know, try again. We want better character. We want, it's, you know. So I think as a for instance, I actually didn't realize you were charging for the boat ramp. Did I hear you say that? Yeah. Okay. I mean, I can tell you that 10 years ago that was an absolutely verboten subject. It was, you could not say that out loud, right? You were there. I was there.
And 20 years ago, they were charging in Miami.
Right. So in other words, the thing is that and so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We don't charge locals.
That's right where I was going to go.
Yeah.
So
Fine.
So the conversation back then was, you know, these are folks that don't live in New Smyrna Beach. They're coming into town. They use our city for a parking lot and they're gone, and then they spend their money somewhere else. You know, that's not, you know. So the fact that I wasn't aware that had happened until today, and I think that's actually an example of, you know, are there ways to strike a balance between the cost and access of the city to the resident, the cost and access of the city to the visitor, and where are the places to find the right balance? Because everything costs money. And I don't think that New Smyrna should be the low cost provider personally. I don't think that's how. I think that's just not how I think people think about New Smyrna Beach.
So I've said often, and I'm taking a little flack for it, but you know, I don't know that cities can be all things to all people. I mean, and especially not at our size. I mean, you know, New York and bigger cities, they can have it. They're broad enough to encapsulate and try to, you know, be all things to all people. I don't know that we can. And so you look at other, you know, we look at other communities that we may aspire to or compare ourselves to, or that we are often compared to. And one thing I think that stands out is they are not all things to all people. I mean, they are who they are. They have an identity. They have a price point to your thing. And I think it's important we kind of own that. You know, this is who we are. We provide I think we provide a high quality of life. I think we provide a high standard of living. You look at our parks and rec infrastructure. You look at our amenities that we provide, things like the Brandon Center. And you go to other communities up and down this coast in Volusia County and elsewhere, and they don't necessarily have that. And you know, that to me, if you look at New Smyrna Beach as a product, that's the product we put on the field, and that comes at a certain price point. And so that yeah, I don't know where to go with that, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not trying to say that in any sort of an exclusionary sort of a way, but I'm just trying to say that there's a lot of people that are, very passionate about the character and quality of the community, and we also, and some of those people live here, and some of those people are trying to get here, either because they want to live here, or they want to do business here, or they want to do whatever. And while we want to encourage growth, I think we shouldn't be in a position of taking sort of a beggar's mentality. I mean, there are some communities that are so desperate for anything that they'll take the first thing off the rack, and I think New Smyrna is way above that.
How do we do that? It's political will
Yeah,
right here.
it is
We have
political
a
will.
Comprehensive land use with all the uses you're
Right.
allowed.
Right.
And unfortunately, sometimes the worst one comes along,
Yeah.
and we take it.
Yeah. Well, and then you get into, what's the letter of the law? Because at some point, you can argue for something, but if somebody has a fundamental right, unless you're willing to go to court, that's so. But I think at a bigger picture scale, I just think being able to define what your standards are, and right now we're talking about the west of 95, but I think we can talk about other areas as well. Defining what your standards are and holding the line because of who you are, I think is an important idea.
But, I mean, we also have to keep in mind that with this lifestyle or this income medium, we had a meeting not long ago, and several of the employees, were present. They don't live here.
They can't live here.
They can't. It's not
Right.
affordable.
Right.
The service workers that are coming to
Sure.
all of
Sure.
our services, they don't live here.
Sure.
So where we blame Orlando for our traffic problem, part of our problem is us, because we haven't provided means for people to live in the community.
Right.
And with transportation, is it a bicycle ride? Is it within walking distance? So we're not providing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to come from elsewhere.
Right.
And they have to park, so they're it's a part of the problem. So if
Right.
you're going to look at this, we kind of need to look at it holistically.
Right. Agreed.
And then on the other avenue, with part of what's with the Venetian Bay thing is, we do these PUDs and we amend these PUDs, and they give you a great visual presentation on paper, but we don't have a physical presentation on some of these large-scale developments.
Mm-hmm.
You go up to latitudes, and you have a 3D model of the entire community. You can see where their parks are going to be.
Yeah.
You can see, where their housing is. You can see the lakes. You can see the green
Right.
areas.
Right.
We didn't require that. We don't have that.
Right.
So where I think we could maybe improve on is if we're requiring pocket parks or green spaces or trails or something like that, maybe we should require that to be in the early part of the build out rather than at the end.
Right.
Because the developer is waiting to the end to build their trails or to build their parks, and the residents that are living there now aren't getting any benefits. So they're coming to us going, where's our parks? Well, it's in the plan. Well, when's the plan? Well, 10 years from now when they build out, you'll have a park. Maybe we should put those requirements in either our LDRs or in some of these PUDs earlier in the process.
Right.
The apartment complex, I'll say it publicly, I supported that, but my vision of that was not what I'm seeing today. And will it be better at the end? Will they landscape and, put some mature trees along 44, which
Right.
was the thought process?
Right.
I don't know, but maybe we should have had a model.
Right.
Give me a 3D model or give me a scale model exactly how this is going to look.
Right. Right.
And then seawater rise, now we're requiring to build 18 inches higher than what they would have done 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When the project was first in conception. So it's kind of a revolving process that it's a learning experience for us, the policymakers, and for staff as they try to keep ahead of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with Commissioner Colodey's ideas, we should be thinking about that now.
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of that property west of 95 have timber rights. A lot of that was planted pines, you know, and those property owners have property rights to remove that timber.
Mhm.
So at some point in time, that's all going to be gone. Do we force larger buffers because of that? Or at the beginning, early on in the process, should we make, you know, the landscape buffers a requirement
Right.
prior to?
Right.
So I think those are short-term things that we can certainly look at
Right.
and do now,
Right.
and going forward.
Right. So I mean, I think the key thing that you said is, you know, if we want to be building places out there, and we don't, and I'm going to come back to the attainable housing thing in a second, but I think if we're interested in character quality communities that are responsible about our environmental infrastructure and responsible about our social infrastructure, we need much better description and visuals and early phase implementation of the things that are going to cause that to happen. It can't be, you know, something that might happen way downstream somewhere. And I think if we can describe what those things are through some kind of a discussion about that region, then I think it you know, I mean, that's another conversation, is to get to what all that stuff is. But I think if we can describe what those things are, then I think it becomes incumbent on the leadership of the city to really try to hold the line. And some of it, you know, might come to, you know, a little deeper understanding about what the real estate market, you know, wants to deliver and can deliver, and those things as well. To the attainable housing, and I'm going to use that as a segue to talk about attainable housing, and you can dive in anytime you want here on this one. The attainable housing thing is real. I mean, you know, and so as a baseline comment, I think getting away from conversations about density, because that is so volatile and frankly not well understood. People hear density and it seems like a big number, and they start to get agitated. I think that what we need to be talking about is form and character and community infrastructure. And if we want to steer or have the development community provide opportunities for attainable housing, it needs to not be about, you know, getting everyone stirred up about, you know, is it 30 units to the acre or 40 units to the acre. It needs to be about the form and the character and the function of what's being delivered on the ground.
Just for the record, we usually develop between 1 and 3 units per acre. I
Right.
don't want anybody
Well-
thinking we're developing high densities.
Well, you know what? You know what? Some of the most beautiful townhomes that you can build come in at 28 units to the acre. And when I say 28 units to the acre, everybody's hair stands on end. But if I showed you the product, you'd be, oh yeah, I definitely would have this. So we just got to get away from this numbers stuff, because it conjures up something in your mind that you don't even actually really understand what you're even talking about in terms of the physical form and the economic position of that product. It has to be
Which I think
about
goes back to-
about form and function, and not disassociated numbers that we don't understand.
Which goes back to Commissioner Hartman's point about being able to visualize. And I'd say at Riddle, every project we did over a certain threshold, pretty small threshold, we had 3D. They could literally sit in a boardroom and watched a 3D fly through, and they would
Right.
fly around the building, and then they would actually fly through the building. We could
Right.
see literally individual offices. I mean, this technology is out there, and it's actually cheap now. So, sorry, Vice Mayor,
Yep.
go ahead.
No, has state of Florida precluded us from setting requirements for affordable housing?
Have they precluded you from setting requirements? I
In
don't.
other words,
Do you mean requiring developers to build a certain percentage
Yes.
of
Yeah.
their units as affordable
yes.
by the actual federal standard of affordable? Or are you saying,
Not necessarily the
Well,
federal standard, but requiring a certain percentage to be of lower cost.
they haven't prevented you from
Nobody's
doing
prevented you from doing that.
Okay, I thought I read that somewhere.
that?
No.
The difficult part of that jurisdictions often run into is enforcement, how those units end up being divided up amongst a community so that they don't end up all concentrated in one cluster of a project, which can then be, just as problematic as building them all in one place.
Yes, exactly.
And then also how long they stay affordable, or does the person, like, if you're going to do it as a city without all of the federal and state dollars associated with those programs attached to them, it's very difficult to keep them affordable so that they don't end up just getting flipped 2 years later.
Well, there's ways to do it.
There are.
Because I come from a state that had a court decision that said you had to have a certain percentage of affordable housing. And over the 20 years or so that was in effect, it was worked out to be that it could be done. Like if you had to build one for every 8 units, every 8 housing units, you had to have one. So it even came down to the point, if you're doing a residential, single-family residential, and you have to provide 2 units, what the developer would do is he would build all the units looking the same, except one of those units might be a duplex. So it fit into the neighborhood very well. And there was no federal money, no state monies, no local monies involved, but the developer would have a requirement that he would have to set that aside for a certain level of income. Right. And he would often have to provide a low-cost mortgage for that, right, or lower there's any
right.
number of functions.
So, yes.
I just wonder, is there anything that the state has regulated to prevent us from doing something like that?
So I thought I remember that as well. I'm sending Carrie an email now. We'll get her gut read on it after lunch. She may not have a definitive answer, but we'll at least get her.
I think, though, that what we're getting to, this is, again, where we can easily get caught up in a discussion about tactics, and we're probably not. Right. We're probably not in a position to be prepared to really talk in detail about what all the tactics, could or should be. There are a variety of strategies to deal with incentivizing or effectuating attainable housing, as well as, affordable subsidized housing in different formats.
Yeah, when I speak of affordable, I'm not talking about subsidized.
You mean attainable?
Yes.
Right. That's why I keep saying attainable.
I've used that one word for my entire life.
Right.
So.
Right. So if what we're talking about is how to provide housing for, folks that are making, a solid blue collar wage or a middle income wage, and these are your teachers, your firemen, your, this is the meat and potatoes of your community. Can those folks live here, and can new construction get delivered at a price point that they can afford? Which is that's the issue I raised earlier. There are a whole variety of things that you can look at doing to effectuate some of those outcomes to happen. And that, to me, would be another strategic initiative, is if you want to start to look at that topic as something that you want to start to address in the near term, and as well as try to get ahead of and sort of build towards in the long term.
Well, that's where I was going. I know we're not going to have an answer for that today.
Right.
But when we look into the long term of out west, I would like that issue addressed and put into it. Yeah, I don't support concentrating that type of housing. I think it should be spread throughout the community. It's the easiest way to help a person increase their standard of living is by putting them in where other people are that have that standard of living. And it's human nature. You tend to follow those parameters.
Okay. So that's a lot of discussion about the west side. I'm wondering if we can maybe move on from that. It feels like, to me, I think the big picture is that I think there's a lot of agreement amongst this discussion that is consistent with things that other people have raised, is that we have an area out there, it's part of the city, it has a different character. We need to figure out how to get in front of it and guide it to deliver a quality of service, a quality of life, environmental integrity. There's a whole set of things that we need. It's almost like what we really need is a strategic small area plan for that region of the city that can result in policy guidance and public investment and fiscal decisions for the future, so you can really be guiding what happens, and we don't just end up with a series of essentially disconnected real estate transactions. You know. So let's maybe leave that to move to some other things. Is that okay?
Before we,
Yes, sir.
as we move on,
Okay.
not to stay there, but just help me. I guess I'm just having a hard time picturing. What is the end of today like? When we get to the end of today, what is the work product that we will have out of this by the end of today, or what are you going to take today, and where does that go from here? What does this look like when we're kind of finished? Because I appreciate that we're staying out of tactics, which is where we
Right.
tend to go to that to-do list, like, hey, what can we get done tomorrow type approach, and I appreciate that.
Right.
But I think for maybe the public and even for me,
Sure.
like just to help guide my thoughts and comments and input of what does this look like moving forward? Because
Right.
it probably, we each probably have something different in our head, so I just want
Yeah.
to make sure that we all are understanding what this will look like as we
Right.
move forward.
So I'm going to tell you what I think, but actually this is a really good juncture. Let's kind of confirm that. I believe that what we're trying to walk out of here with is some consensus about, pick a number, 5, 6, 7 key topics of interest, strategic interest to the city, and philosophically get some talking points on the table about where we stand on that, and then some directionality or some action to effectuate forward momentum on that. If we want it, and if we can take it a step further and say, well, we need to invest in this, or we need to build one of these, or create the to-do list, we can do that.
Yeah.
But I think there are some big picture issues on the table that we don't quite have shared consensus that we're all saying the same thing and want to move in the same direction.
Okay.
I just need to add,
But if that's not right,
Hang on, let him-
Yeah.
yeah, just real quick. Climate uncertainty is something that's
Mhm.
in the back of our mind.
Mm-hmm.
But we could have an event next hurricane season.
Sure.
that would change up everything.
Sure.
That seems to be where the predominant, in-your-face climate uncertainty bears its
Right.
head.
Yeah.
I've noticed the diminishing beach head. But so much of our city is maritime, and the barrier island, and the flooding to the west. And I think these are preeminent dangers that we should face. I know we discuss balancing nature and commerce and
Right,
all that,
right.
but this is a pressing issue. I
Sure.
believe.
Yeah. So to your point, I mean, that makes sense. I probably still could use some defining of what that looks like. As far as the issues, I mean, I think the 6 that are on the screen are the ones that keep coming up. And so we spent a lot of time on the second to last one, I think, specifically the western land part, tied to growth. I mean, kind of all those elements of that one area. But I think those are certainly the unifying themes to me. But I'd defer to the rest of the commission on what were your thoughts on how he just kind of laid out. Does that make sense? Is everybody clear on that? Good with that? And this is our process to own. So
What I would like to see is a very short report highlighting, let's say, 5 particular items that can be used as a guide as we get into the detailed items. Some document we could take out when we're faced with a budget item,
Yeah.
a ordinance type.
What's our
item.
value set that we're
That
going to
we-
make?
that we can-
We have a decision on the table
Back.
today. What value set are we going to compare this decision to see if does this help us move in the right direction?
At the term I probably could think of the most that would be applicable would be a vision statement.
Yeah.
And then we can get into how to implement it at that point.
yeah.
Okay.
Other thoughts? Anything to add? Subtract? Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to write vision statements for each of these things, or just deal with the talking points? I mean, I think if we can define what we're trying to do, and I can write sort of a draft mission statement that I think encapsulates what you're trying to accomplish, and we can have some bullets underneath that say, this is what we want, this is the direction we want to move, and these are the things we care about.
I'm sorry. We had a vision statement in our handout.
I was going to find. I
Right.
kind of liked it.
So I mean, that,
Okay? And I'm good with that. I mean,
that, I think was business residents kind of
Yep.
all came together and
Yep.
came up with that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
You know, I'm not, and I think it was pretty good to me.
Okay.
So I think that may be something that we could use that and go, given this,
Okay.
you know, what is attainable, what should
Okay.
we focus on?
Do we want to?
Hang on, we had a couple more comments. I want to come to Kyle too. Did you have something else?
No, you know, I just want to back up. I don't want to get too academic. Meat and potatoes. So we had the vision statement. I agree with what Randy's saying. Let's focus on tangible meat and potatoes, not academics.
Yeah, agree.
We've done academics for years.
I'm right there, and that's why I say we're staying away from tactics, and I get that. But at the end of the day, we're the citizens see tactics. You know, I mean, so it's one thing to have the strategy, but we also have to have some actionable. And that's where I go back to my metrics and how you measure success on all of these. So I hope that gets laced in there somewhere. If not, I'm just going to do it on my own. But Khaled, you had something.
Yeah, I'm glad he asked the questions about, you asked the question about the expectations. Normally, the strategic plan, you will see a set of goals. So you have the items that kind of got repeated between the community meetings, the meeting with the commissioners individually and the staff. And I appreciate we're not going to go to the tactics, but at some point, I mean, you're going to have these goals and you're going to come in and how are you going to accomplish them? So what I'm thinking is that probably at this one, you're looking at probably the 10,000, 20,000 level, but we probably need to have, after you get your report, I think we need to have another session with the commission of how we're going to attack these goals.
Right.
So,
Well, and that's part of what I want to get to this
We're not gonna get
afternoon.
into it
That's
now,
part of the
but
that's
it's-
part of the discussion for this afternoon. Is what are the things we can act on?
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I was going to suggest, is we should schedule now that the day after we get all this. Because a lot of times we do these processes and we have them, and then it's 4 or 5 months before we get to the budgeting session. So some of this stuff kind of, and we're trying to, well, what exactly was the point of that discussion? So I think if we schedule something immediately after the final report or presentation to get into the weeds and say, which one of these are we going to check off today?
My idea is he will present the final report on the strategic plan, and at that day, we'll schedule a whole day session where we actually look at each goal that he presented to us. Because really, from a staff standpoint, I mean, we're looking for a clear directions of how we're going from this point on.
Right.
I mean, they used to call it the roadmap, and I call it the GPS right now. I mean, this is the technology time. And for us to move forward and be proactive, I think we need to have the tactics, not at this meeting, but the following meeting. And so it makes it clear for the staff and we'll be more focused to get to the point we want it to be.
And when you finalize your stuff, your thing, I think it should go to the city manager and staff almost immediately. So they
Right.
could be thinking about, okay,
Correct.
this is kind of what we took out of this, knowing that the commission's going to meet shortly thereafter and say, what's the quick fix, or I mean, how can we
Right.
accomplish this one? How can we check this box off?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if I misunderstood, but I want to get Pete's report before we meet. I don't want to.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I
Yeah.
want to. You
Yeah,
said
yeah,
we'll get
I'm
it
saying
that
you
day
get
and
it.
have a
No,
meeting.
I'm
I want to
saying
make
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
it's
And then we'll have the meeting.
Good. Okay.
You've got strategy and then you've got tactics. And so it's important to have a strategy because that kind of guides, like, here's where we're trying to get to. And then you take off the bite-sized chunks of that. They're the tactics to say, if we do this, we're moving in that direction. You can't get there all in one bite. But if we do these 5 things this year, that will get us closer to where we're trying to get, from a strategic standpoint.
Right.
And if we have the right metrics, we can actually measure that we've gotten closer.
Right.
Just one more plug.
And I will tell you what, some of this is just what organizational structure do you want to use to guide how you're going to put your thoughts together. And I'm just as comfortable with these 4 ideas as I am the 6 things that I wrote down on the other slide. I think maybe the only thing, we need to get into some of the sub-bullets under these things, but I think that if there's anything that they're maybe not quite talking about here quite as much is how communication could and should work. But I think some of that's baked into their vision statement. And I think so. Again, I think if we want to co-opt those documents, they're usable documents. And certainly in either rubric, the information that they have in those documents is completely valid.
You know, if the commission is in agreement, I think the one issue that I don't see it there is the homeless issue.
Okay.
And it's a growing
Sure.
issue. And
Sure.
It's really, from a staff standpoint, we
Sure.
don't have any tactics at this point. We're trying to work with it, but I think it's an issue that it's growing, and it's gonna come into a point where it's gonna blow in our face.
I think it falls under quality of life, but I agree. I think it's one we've got to walk out today having had some time to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So I'll share with you what they shared at the League of Cities conference was Sarasota had thousands of homeless people.
mhm.
They reduced their homeless population by 200%, and they did it by transitional housing.
Mhm.
They gave them a place to stay. They could get a job.
Yep.
They could go to work clean. They could build an income. They could move on. And that's how they accomplished their homeless.
Right.
I don't think the residents of New Smyrna Beach want to hear that.
Right.
But, that was and they modeled it after other cities. So that
Yeah.
was
Housing
great.
first is the solution to
Yeah,
homelessness,
you
and
don't
it's
have a roof
proven.
over your head, you're
Yeah.
not worried about anything else.
Yeah.
So,
The question is how they pay for it.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, they figured out that they were spending thousands of dollars on police time,
yeah.
fire time, other services, local services, donating to charities, who support these things, and they took that money and put it in to housing.
Yeah, and the challenge is that money is hard to. It's hard. I mean, the only direct money that we're investing into homelessness that's top of my mind is the 35,000 grant program. All of the rest of that's hard to pull out of the budget to stroke a check. I can't pull back the 10 minutes I saved from that officer's time to stroke a check, and so it's
Right.
tough time to redeem. I could crunch the numbers and find it and show you that yes, it probably pays off.
There's
but it's
communities that
finding
have created funds out of new development to fund this other program. Over
Yeah, there's other ways to get there.
It's
Yeah.
just like the workforce housing thing.
Well,
There's-
and,
Go ahead.
and, we talk about homeless, and the fact of the matter is, and I have some personal knowledge on this, we have a tremendous amount of the homeless have mental illness issues.
Mhm.
So it's really not a, hey, you need a place to live, let's
Right,
put you in a place.
right.
People, it's really a mental health issue and drug issue, and the drug issue exacerbates the mental health issue.
Yep.
So I'm very, very interested in seeing a city that we can do something after. But we have no budget for mental illness. It keeps getting cut. And what I would say about the homeless is let's start working on mental health issues and finding ways to fund that, and we'll start also solving some of our homeless issues.
So, to me, this is a pretty big idea strategically. I don't know when the
I think
city.
we're too small for it. We don't generate the kind of revenue.
Right.
We
Right.
can do anecdotal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All we can do is, as a city, as part of a county,
Mhm.
try to get together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, because let's let's be candid. The challenge is if we got if we you don't want to. We're not big enough to import. If we become the premier provider, we're not big enough to support that. We can't sustain that, and so all of a sudden we're the premier provider, and so therefore everyone is being coming to us, either be transported to us or they migrate to us because and we can't sustain that.
Right. We can't get roads and bridges paved, and yet with our budget and the police resources that we have in our homeless problem is not going to make even a dent in this issue.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to a city, a very large city with hundreds of millions of dollars is a little different.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where this is truly something I think regional is the issue, and that's where the first step shelter is I think the concept is right. I don't know if the execution is TBD, but the concept of we've got to partner with other community partners to solve this.
Right.
So,
So saying that we want to launch that as we want to recognize that there's an issue, that the issue is probably going to grow. We don't have resources to solve it on our own, but it needs to be addressed. And where are the what peer city success can we point to? Who are the potential partners that we can start to work with around us? And where would funding come from?
Well, and I want to be candid here, because this is what the intention of these are for.
Mhm.
We always say we don't want to be like Daytona. Well,
Right.
Daytona got strict on their,
Right.
they created some new ordinances.
Right.
That's getting the push-down effect. And we're seeing a huge increase in the homeless.
Right.
So if we're not careful, we're going to look like Daytona, but not in the traditional sense that people have said that. And right now, that is growing, and if we don't deal with it with laws and ordinances soon, we are going to look like Daytona.
but it's interesting because Daytona didn't solve homelessness. They solved their issue. They solved it within their city limits.
Yes.
Right.
But they didn't actually increase this. I mean, it's not an attack on Daytona. I'm just saying it's that is an approach. So, but yeah, we got to do something.
Right. Good. Okay. We were about to talk about, for a moment, coastal resiliency. Do we want to go to that for a moment?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Do you want to start, or do you have? I mean, strategically.
You know, I live on the beach side, so, you tend to walk down to the beach, see the changes from day to day, literally. And so we know there's change. I recently, and it's happened 1,000 times before, that our beach walkovers are even susceptible to even a high tide, where you can't walk on the beach anymore. It's been posted in all the newspapers. All of the coastal cities are feeling it. I know that in the last hurricane, some beach walkovers, fences, other materials, just east of the dune system, were damaged. In our hurricanes, they're washed away. And yet we still have to approve the building of them because they've been given the right to build in this high hazard zone. That's one of the beachside challenges. We've allowed people to build structures east of the coastal construction setback. We only touched on the subject, and I think we spent like $80,000 for a study. But we never, we had a change in the political regime, and we kind of fell by the wayside again because, we don't feel it like they do in Miami Beach. But I'm starting to wonder if they're going to start feeling it on the west. One of our UC commissioners, I was listening to their meeting, and he actually said, maybe we should move from the building on Canal Street because of storm rise. 2-3 feet of water in the street, who knows? So we really need to talk about that. And then in our last city commission, we were discussing a high school being an evacuation site, but then they realized due to LIDAR that elevation is not adequate. You can't evacuate to there.
Right.
And then we have all the homeless people, where they're going to go.
Right.
So all these hidden challenges, aside from the ones that we see from day to day on our dais, is this global threat.
Right.
Water.
Right.
So we're just, people are just starting to read about it. They're not discussing it.
I mean, even to add to that is our stormwater.
Yeah.
Because for years we're dependent upon the river as to channel stormwater, or thinking that that was the way. And with the seawater rising, we're having stormwater issues all the way back almost to 95.
Right.
The ditches aren't doing what they were designed to do, or
Right.
that's no longer. So we need to rethink that process at some point
You see the article from a couple weeks ago about the coastal resiliency strategy in Monroe County and the Keys? A big part of the strategy was we're just backing out.
Yeah, yeah.
Relocate.
That one island.
Yeah.
R word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and that's not where we want to be, obviously.
But I think there will be economic decisions that have to be made. I mean, if it's two or three homes in an area and it's going to cost, millions of dollars to save it, it's easier to just retreat and to higher ground, literally.
Well, we have a major metropolitan city, being Miami, which
Right.
seems to be pretty much ground zero.
Sure.
They're doing this first, and we can talk and spend a lot of time pontificating on what the right options are. But the good news is that we're going to watch a major metropolitan city and the Florida Keys go through this first, and
Right.
out of that process there's going to be a lot to learn,
Mhm.
and there's going to be mistakes, and we're going to try not to repeat those.
Right.
So that's going to play out over the next.
Well, and I can just tell you that some of the main talking points of the work down there. This won't be an all-encompassing thing, but some of the main talking points are, first of all, there are areas where they are building roads, literally rebuilding roads, 3 and 4 feet higher than the finished grade of existing buildings. So you're actually walking down from the street to go into the front door of a building. I mean, they're building that. For people who don't think sea level rise is real, or they that doesn't agree with their political view or what, it's Miami's in it, and they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to deal with it.
Doing the roads,
So-
and then the problem is we have the
Right. So let me just rattle off the 3 or 4 things that they're kind of dealing with. So one is they're working with raising roads. 2 is they're putting in a lot of infrastructure to essentially pump out water in these urban areas. 3 is they have changed the finished floor elevation for new construction, and in some cases it's disassociated from the ground plane. You have to go up to get to the finished floor. And the other is they're dealing. A lot of cities are working very, very hard on storm surge and how to do different types of breaks and different types of ways to mitigate or lessen the impact of just wave action and just the sheer damage of wave action. And then probably the last thing that sort of leaps to mind is they're having a lot of conversation down there about, once water comes in, how does water get out? Because what happens is water comes in and will flood an area, and the area becomes inundated, and there's no way for the water to get out. So, like you say, they're dealing with that in real time, and there's plenty of topics and tactics that they're experimenting with down there to try to deal with what's now happening on an annual and even multiple times a year basis for areas that haven't experienced that kind of stuff ever.
Could you please write down, so we could all ingrain it in our minds, backflow preventers and baffle boxes? Backflow preventers to keep our lower communities from flooding. It'll help some percentage if the water doesn't come over the seawall. And baffle boxes to clean up the storm water that goes out to the river. I think in the big scheme of things, we don't have $400 million to start spending on raising up our city.
Right.
But we may have the million or so to get started on some baffle boxes and
Right.
backflow preventers.
Right. I mean, I think again, not to. I think this is another thing where you need to sort of launch a more comprehensive set of things through a more detailed conversation. But I think the things that New Smyrna should immediately be thinking about is, finished floor for new buildings, stormwater management. Where does water go? Do you have capacity? So you think about storms. It's about how high are the buildings? What's the storm surge impact? What's the flood impact projected to be on the new data sets that the Army Corps of Engineers is producing? Because they're now getting projections for 2050 and 2100 and things like that. So how to start moving in that direction, and then water quality. And there's plenty of communities that are dealing with a lot of saltwater intrusion in places where they never had to deal with it before.
Pete, we have taken steps on the finished floor elevation. I think it's the biggest thing I learned when I went to the FEMA class up in Emmitsburg, and this is a long time ago. The only way to resolve this issue is either you don't build in the floodplain or you will be most restrictive. So, for example, Miami is spending millions of dollars. They're trying to pump the water. Where are they going to pump it to?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so you're addressing one area
Right.
and taking care of the other area. So I think it's the restrictions on the floodplain. I think that is our biggest thing right now,
Right.
because we have addressed
Right.
the finished floor elevation, the stormwater system, but the floodplain is really the biggest thing. Is in how we tackle that. I think that's from a legal standpoint too.
So this is going to seem very disconnected. And John, I'm going to need a number from you real quick. What did we borrow at the Turnbull Creek? Wasn't it like a 2-point-something interest rate? 2.29 or something. 2.29 is what's in my head. So the point I want to make is I think another strategic topic to talk about that laces through all of these are, I don't know what interest rates are going to do in 5 years or 10 years. Nobody does. But I know they can't go much lower than they are today. So if we wanted to, present, if we had some strategy where we said, here are some bigger ticket things that we can't pay for out of our standard, taxes we collect, we're never going to build up enough money to resolve this. But we, had some definitive solutions to some of these issues, or at least starting to solve them. And we wanted to, go to the market. Now's the time. Now's the time to. I'm not a huge fan of debt. I'm not trying to get the city in a bunch of debt, but debt doesn't get much cheaper. And sometimes it's the only way to kind of tackle some of these big ticket items that we may not have 10 years to build up the funds to solve this. By the time we build it up, the problem may have grown much larger. So I think something strategically to talk about is, the use of debt in our financial strategy and the timing of that, and what issues we might could accelerate with the use of.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, just sort of thinking about just where growth is in the city, we just spent a long time talking about, community needs on the west side when we've already got a community in the traditional town and on the beach. And it sounds like we're going to be taking a bunch of that revenue and spending it on the west side for people who aren't here yet. And, I don't want people to walk away with that idea. That's not what we're saying, but there's sort of a way of thinking about that conversation. We're going to do all this stuff over here, and we're not paying attention over here on the beach. I think that comes full circle right now, because I think New Smyrna Beach has access to readily developable property that will create revenue, whether it's US 1 or things that can happen on 44 or things that can happen in other parts of town. That can, again, you're not a small beach residential enclave that doesn't have any tools in the toolkit. You have economic tools in the toolkit, and like you say, you can't get much lower than 2%. So, I do see opportunities for growth here, and I see opportunities for commercial development here that can help you deal with things that you want to take on over time.
Well, when we were talking about the growth out west, I don't think there was any thought that we would pay for that.
Right.
It was through regulations.
Correct.
Our biggest impact, well, first of all, you have sea level rise. It's going to rise.
Mm-hmm.
There's not too much we can do about that, and we may lose some features along the beach. It just may happen, and I don't think we should put a lot of money into protecting them. Where our biggest impact is, if you're like me and you watch the weather thing and you look at all the items from NOAA that come in, the biggest impact we really have is inland. It's on the mainland. It's the water that backs up and gets into the historic west side and all those roads in there. And I know we've talked about raising the minimum building elevations a little higher than the federal government insurance requires. But things like that are important. And that also relates back into the requirement, because when you're raising all these houses up, there's nothing left, because every tree is going to go. So we really have to look at those regulations to see what direction we want to go in.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made sense, but
No, Mike.
You had me right
not-
till the
Mike,
end. Go
Not
ahead.
only does it make sense, but and that's what a lot of people don't understand. They think the coastal or the water rising is a coastal issue, and it's not. And for us, most of our property that is well below the base flood elevation of 5-6 feet is east of
Right
or
here.
west of
Yeah.
US 1.
Yeah.
And we have a whole town that has already been built at 5 or 6 feet above base flood elevation. And it keeps, not only can we not afford to bring all this up, but the base flood elevation required by the federal government keeps going up. So if you built at 8 feet and now it's 9, you're now below the base flood elevation, and it's very expensive to get insurance.
Right.
So as this progresses forward 10, 20 years out, what happens to all the affordable housing that is below the base flood elevation that then gets too expensive for people to be able to insure? And they can't get mortgages for the home because they can't afford to insure it at $5,000 or $10,000 a year just for flood insurance.
Right.
So this is a very big problem, and it's a lot bigger than simply just looking at the ocean saying the ocean's coming in.
yeah, it's like the world is obviously a very diverse place. So is New Smyrna. And whatever we do to solve a flooding problem, whether it exists or we think it's going to exist, affects everything else along the line. So it's a long-range planning type of thing that we got to take that mindset and put that forward.
Did you guys know if we take out like 10 acres of trees, you raise the water table in that area? It's amazing the impact of just the trees, not even just turning over and messing with wetlands. With the impact of water, we're so low, is incredible. I don't know how Miami grew with all the pilings, concrete pilings, and some coral marl. Here it's all sand and marsh. So how are we going to, we're constrained by so many things, the sea, the water, the growth, the balancing commerce versus our quality of life, which equates to the environment. Boy, are we challenged. We're doing a good
Right.
job, I think.
Right.
We've got so many challenges. Visitation, how do we accommodate them with the parking? Low hanging fruit, I wonder if we should concentrate on more. What the people are vocal about, of course, is number one. And we agree, it's quality of life. How do you balance that? That's what our coastal city's looking at now, with Mother Nature staring you in the face.
Right. Yeah, we haven't talked about transportation and parking very much. And we did hear some about that in the public meetings, and I know that you all mentioned it. I think that that's needs to be a strategic item, is just circulation. And I think to the mayor's point, I think that circulation is we are entering into a time of change on how circulation works. We also know that we do have, the two bridges. The one bridge has a drawbridge on it, and it's lane constrained, and Flagler Avenue is constrained, and all that. And you've been doing a tremendous amount of work on transportation improvements and so forth around town. So, how do we feel about just positioning transportation and circulation as a strategic item, and developing some to-dos around that? With some of those to-dos being how to facilitate alternative solutions. And when I say alternative solutions, let me define what I think the traditional solution is. The traditional solution is single trip, single destination in your car. So that means if I want to go to a shop or a store or a destination, I'm in my car and I'm going to go and park at the front door of that location, and that's how I get there. And then I leave my car there for as long as I'm there, and then I get in my car and I leave, and I don't do any other trips. What I'm putting on the table there is maybe an alternative view of the world that I know has been talked about here in the past, but I think is actually getting much more close to reality, which is ideas about being a more multimodal city, about creating environments that are park once environments. Maybe you get near your destination, and then you can circulate and hit multiple uses rather than just the one use. And thinking about what, whether it's rideshare or circulator systems or individual mobility types of things, if it's bike share or whatever it is, but also thinking about the future that will ultimately get here, which is autonomous vehicles, and the idea that even if you want to have your own car and you want to do that single-use trip, you can actually take your car to a place and you can tell it to turn around and go home. And then when you're ready to get picked up, your car can come back and get you. That's actually, I would say, less than 10 years away. And I'm only saying that because I've seen it. I mean, they're driving around right now in downtown Pittsburgh, and the only thing controlling that car is there's two guys with notebooks sitting in the front seat, writing reports about what the car does based on what somebody somewhere else is telling it to do. So I think all of those things are here. So I think New Smyrna, over time, technology is going to affect New Smyrna in a positive way, but I also think continuing to work on how to be a more multimodal place and a more park once environment where you can go to a place, you park, you leave your car, you go where you need to go, and there's alternate ways of getting you circulated around, as opposed to having to park in the front door of every location that you want to be 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and for me, I think putting that as a strategic issue is wholeheartedly support, and hopefully what comes out of that is some creative conversations about how do we solve some of this. And so you can think of the traditional solutions such as parking decks and those kind of elements, or you can think of more modern day solutions, which would be maybe there's incentives that we partner with Uber, Lyft type of things, and say trips that originate or terminate in certain districts or areas that we are parking constrained. We have a program to help incentivize those. So we partner with Lyft or whatever, and kind of the inverse of a surge pricing. We say, hey, we'll subsidize pricing in this area for trips that terminate or start in a certain district. And instead of spending millions on a parking garage, we put some kind of a program like that in place that bridges a gap between where we are today and then in 10 or 15 years, what I think will be a totally different transportation landscape. So, yeah, I fully support it. Sorry, go ahead, Brandy.
But with that, we also need to look at commercial traffic. We have a large semis running up and down Flagler and so small residential streets and parking for hours, doing deliveries when, I read an article where some of these larger cities are making them offload at a core center, and they're using smaller vehicles to make, their deliveries and stuff. I mean, UPS and FedEx do that now.
Yeah, they do.
They'll park their truck on a side street and use a golf cart to make their delivery.
Yeah.
It's got to be effective, or they wouldn't be doing it.
Well, yes. The answer is I think that it's time to start looking at those things. Flagler Avenue, is a district that could be thought of as a single destination district. And there may be some things that need to be handled through shared management that would benefit everybody.
Well, I think even
And
Canal
it's-
Street.
and Canal Street, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
ways
for
that
sure.
Revised and
For sure.
and the activity that's going on now.
For sure.
It used to not be an issue 10 years ago, like you
Yep.
said.
Yep.
But now you're starting to see a little bit of that also.
Right.
And then as we redevelop these areas, with the construction going across the street, that's impacting on how we do things.
Right.
can't park at City Hall because of the construction we're doing.
Right.
So, if we're going to look at transportation, maybe we need to look, again, holistically at this and say, maybe if you're going to do business in the area, maybe we need to provide, a shuttle service or some other thing to get people or goods, services to
Right.
that area,
Right.
because it just can't handle the area.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, there should be dedicated functional service and loading zones to handle areas. That's a pretty common thing with really historic places that are overloaded with those kinds of needs.
You just won one big fan right back there in the back, I'll tell you.
I mean, no,
Currently, we're doing the Flagler Avenue parking study.
Okay.
And loading zones are gonna be part of that.
yeah,
So we've analyzed the actual use twice a year.
Yep.
I've walked the street with the chief, and we've picked out areas for loading zones.
Yep.
That's short-term type of thing.
hmm
I think it's important to look at transportation long-term. However, the subject is evolving so quickly. I don't know how you can long-term plan it. That's a problem. And the second thing is, the second aspect is, and I've heard this about 10 times so far, well, bigger cities do that, bigger cities do this. But I don't think New Smyrna has the critical mass to financially support a lot of these ideas. I like them all. I like scooters. I like whatever it is, but I think it'll end up that we're subsidizing it, just like we subsidize bus service now.
hmm
I don't want that to become an overriding factor.
Right, right.
I'd like to be able to plan for it, but I don't think that it's going to be supportable financially.
So I was talking to some folks that live out, on the beach side, and they were talking about, the traffic and the beach visitation and stuff. And we got right to that point pretty quickly because, they had this great idea, which is that, we ought to have some remote parking, let people come to some place on the causeway, park their car, get onto a little trolley circulator, and I said, that's great. That's a great idea.
Except if you live on the causeway or Catalina Island.
Well,
Or an Ottawa.
well, there's that. Yeah.
Problem.
I'm presuming you can find a site that's appropriate.
No.
Well, okay.
That's dead.
Okay. Well, all right. So let me get back to what I was going to say.
Let's be honest.
Well, okay. So I'm getting. All right, let's not get caught up in that then. The theory was though, let's have a remote parking location and run a shuttle. And so the question becomes, will the community support that? Oh, well, the community won't have to support that. We'll get the business owners to pay for it. And I said, that's a great idea. I love that. Except we're hearing that the rents on the small businesses continue to go up. So, I mean, the point is all of this stuff costs money.
Yes.
Well, the trolley system wasn't that necessary. We didn't get to the cost issue. We got to the fact that the residents on Beachside and North Causeway did not want a trolley system moving around
Yeah.
the neighborhood.
Right.
So we didn't even get.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, and I'm not trying to advocate for that. Or I guess what I'm saying is, when you get into these conversations, it's amazing how circular and interconnected all these issues are. There are not clean silver bullet answers to this thing. I think is lunch being coming in soon?
Yeah, we're about.
Yeah. So I think maybe a place to sort of I think where this brings us is a place to maybe stop and maybe segue the next conversation is communication and communication strategies and information strategies because again, all of these issues are interconnected, and it's not helpful or healthy to take, sort of one-dimensional, sort of black and white views of things and, stomp your feet that it's got to be exactly like this and every other criterion, be damned and everything because the fact of the matter is every little thing within New Smyrna New Smyrna Beach is an ecosystem, both in environmental terms, but also in human terms and economic terms. All these things become interconnected, and we have to have good platforms to have thoughtful dialogue. So I think we got some definite input on that. We could talk about that a little bit after lunch, and then we could start to maybe drill into these things a little bit more and talk about some potential actions.
I think something you just said is key, and I've said that before with the parking issue. Like we've never talked about that, at least in my experience, holistically. Like it's easy when the trolley comes up, and so it's like, well, here's all the potential issues with that. And it's like, well, then we talk about some other small slice of all these possible solutions,
Right.
rather than looking at it holistically. Because the issue is that you can always find some small issues with whatever you propose in a silo.
Correct.
But if we holistically acknowledge, hey, we have an issue, here's 15 possible solutions,
Right.
here's the pros and cons of each, then you can start, doing nothing is doing something. That is making a conscientious choice to do nothing. So that's one possible slice, and then there's all these other ways we can approach it. And I feel like we've sometimes approached these things a little bit summarily, like it's hey, what about a trolley? And then all of a sudden it lands up here, and we have to vote on whether or not we want to pursue a trolley or not. And
Right.
we have not the slightest amount of this holistic look at well, here's what it will possibly solve, here's a possible cost, et cetera, et cetera. And so it just kind of these I think some good concepts die on the vine because they just aren't fully developed and fleshed out and presented in a holistic view. So
Correct.
with that, I think
Okay.
we'll break for lunch. It's right about 12, so we'll be back here right about 1 o'clock.
Right. Good.
Shortly after.
Great. Thank you.